Good evening, Little Masters, and welcome to episode 159 of the Prancing Pony Podcast, where there is indeed some new devilry here.
But is it devised for our welcome, or is it devised by us for your welcome?
Yes.
We're going to let you folks decide. So go ahead and pull up a bench in the common room, and we'll be right there. I'm Sean Marchese, the real-life Lord of the Mark, and I'm here with the Man of the West, whose streaming mane kindled and blazed behind him. Who writes these things, man?
That would be me, but at least that puts me in a position to give a definitive answer to that persistent question.
Well, yeah, but it means you're a demon.
Well, that is a problem.
And it's also going to make everybody start asking if you have wings, but...
Maybe I do. They're vestigial.
Yeah, exactly. Let's not get ahead of ourselves, though.
No, all in good time.
And speaking of good time, we're going to try and make good time tonight by just skipping an intro segment altogether and going straight to our discussion. We've just got a lot to talk about today, folks.
We really do. We've got a lot to talk about tonight. So we're going to get straight to the book because we really do love the books here at the Prancing Pony Podcast.
We bring you other Tolkien stuff from time to time, but at heart, you folks know, Alan and I are fans of Tolkien's books and books about Tolkien. Mm-hmm. That's what we love.
Yep. And as you know, we read a lot of books in preparation for this show every week. And if you'd like to get your hands on a book that we've mentioned, you'll want to check out the official library page of our website, theprancingponypodcast.com. There we have links to every book we've mentioned on the show.
And there's a lot of other stuff on our website, too. Show notes and book links specific to each episode, outtakes, Prancing Pony ponderings, and some other little extras. You'll also find a link to our new online storefront at teespring.com/stores/PPP, where you can find shirts, mugs, stickers, and other Prancing Pony Podcast gear. So please be sure to check that out.
Definitely. Now, before we do get to the book, we wanted to let you know that today's episode of the Prancing Pony Podcast is sponsored by the Music of Middle-earth podcast.
Yes, it is. Jordan Rennells has his own Tolkien-related podcast that he's really excited to share with all of you, and frankly, we're really excited about it too.
Yeah, we are. Now, Jordan's a musician and a teacher. You've heard from him before on the show, and he's beginning a podcast that explores Tolkien and Howard Shore's music from the Peter Jackson movie adaptations.
He's exploring how the many themes are built, the emotions and ideas from Tolkien's writing that inspired them, and also some history to go along with it all.
Mm-hmm. So go look for the Music of Middle-earth podcast wherever you listen, and be sure to subscribe. Now follow him on Instagram at Music of Middle-earth and on Facebook at Music of Middle-earth Podcast. Now, let's join the company as they stumble in the dark on their way to a fateful meeting. We'll be reading just about every word in the rest of the chapter because it is so dense with action and meaning, so stick around and pay attention.
Indeed. And I'm going to go ahead and get us started.
Yeah, please do.
And I'm picking up today right where we left off in the last episode.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
They now went on again. Before long, Gimli spoke. He had keen eyes in the dark.
"I think," he said, "that there is a light ahead. But it is not daylight. It is red. What can it be?"
"Gosh," muttered Gandalf. "I wonder if that is what they meant, that the lower levels are on fire. We can only go on." Soon the light became unmistakable, and could be seen by all. It was flickering and glowing on the walls away down the passage before them. They could now see their way. In front, the road sloped down swiftly, and some way ahead there stood a low archway. Through it the growing light came. The air became very hot. When they came to the arch, Gandalf went through, signing to them to wait. As he stood just beyond the opening, they saw his face lit by a red glow. Quickly he stepped back. "There is some new devilry here," he said. "Devised for our welcome, no doubt. But I know now where we are. We have reached the first deep, the level immediately below the gates. This is the second hall of Old Moria, and the gates are near. Away beyond the eastern end, on the left, not more than a quarter of a mile. Across the bridge, up a broad stair, along a wide road, through the first hall and out. But come and look." They peered out. Before them was another cavernous hall. It was loftier and far longer than the one in which they had slept. They were near its eastern end. Westward it ran away into darkness. Down the center stalked a double line of towering pillars. They were carved like boles of mighty trees, whose boughs upheld the roof with a branching tracery of stone. Their stems were smooth and black, but a red glow was darkly mirrored in their sides. Right across the floor, close to the feet of two huge pillars, a great fissure had opened. Out of it a fierce red light came, and now and again flames licked at the brink and curled about the bases of the columns. Wisps of dark smoke wavered in the hot air.
Oh boy, let's get started then, shall we?
Mm-hmm. Boy, we are right into the thick of it, aren't we?
We really are. There was a reason why we went a little long in the last episode in terms of the chapter split. You know, we didn't do it right in the middle, and it was because we knew there was so much to do here, and we just hit the ground running.
We did.
So we get second sentence or third sentence. He had keen eyes in the dark. Let's just make this official. He has infravision.
That dwarvish infravision, yeah.
No, very special.
And I know it's dark vision now in all the later editions of D&D. I know.
You gotta remember how I grew up, right?
I'm old school. I still think of it as infravision.
Yeah, same here. Fine.
Gandalf observes fire. Gosh. The air is growing hot, flickering on the walls. I know that word
Sorry,
is so
folks,
fun
we're
to
laughing
say.
because there's going to be a blooper. If you haven't heard it by now, you'll hear it shortly. You'll have to take a look at that.
That black speech word for fire is very fun and also very difficult to say.
Very difficult. That GH combination is
that gosh.
Yeah, I can't. That's why I try to give it to you all the time.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that.
Well, you are our resident.
It's what I get for
nerd.
being the word nerd.
Right. Yeah, your fault.
But yeah, I mean, the hot air and the flickering on the walls, it's like all the signs of the fire until before they actually see the fire.
Before the actual fire is seen, right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which is interesting because then we get the word new devilry, which again kind of conjures up these images of flame, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But this phrase that is, of course, given to Boromir in the films is something that Gandalf says.
Yeah.
New devilry devised for our welcome. Mm-hmm.
And I think it's easy to read way too much into that word, considering that they're about to be confronted by an actual demon.
Yeah.
And I think you talked about how Boromir kind of delivers that line in the movie, and that he's kind of brooding and really dark when he says it, and that does kind of reinforce the idea that he might be foreshadowing the Balrog. But I just want to point out that according to the Oxford English Dictionary, devilry just means like a wicked act or
evil or
evil doing,
mischief,
reckless mischief. Exactly. So it really is referring more to the orcs and their attempt to trap them with this fire, which is what's going on.
But I don't think it's an accident that Tolkien used the word devilry as opposed to there is some new
mischief
evil here.
Yeah, you're probably right about
orc
that.
Mischief here, right?
You probably are right about that. That's fair.
He chose it for that double meaning, I think. Yeah.
You probably are right.
Implication. Yeah.
But Gandalf at least has his bearings for sure.
Yeah.
Now. He knows where
we know exactly where we are, right?
Yeah.
First deep. We've gone a
Below
little too
the
far.
Gates, we're in the second
Probably
hall.
just as well that we have as it turns out, but yes.
Yeah, right. It ends up working out well for them that they went too far.
Yes, it does. Yeah. Yes, it does. And it's not too far from the exit, is it?
No.
We just have to go east to the end of the hall. So Gandalf says on the left, so they must be coming from the north side.
They're coming in through the north, yeah.
Right. So they go to the east and then across a bridge, up a stair, and then through the first hall and they're out.
Across the bridge, up the stair, along the wide road, through the first hall, and then we're out. Right. That's it. That's all there is.
That's all there is, yeah. And by the way, there's a lot of orcs shooting at you, and there's a devil.
Yeah. Right, exactly. Yeah.
So we're done, man. We're out. We're as good as done.
Yeah.
High fives all around, bro. All right.
No. We're not out yet.
Now, if you're really curious about kind of what this might look like, Karen Fonstad's Atlas of Middle-earth, which is a reference that we go to all the time and we've recommended over and over, has a really clear illustration of this in that atlas. So be sure to look that up if you have that book handy.
Very cool. So now let's take a look at the space that they're in. So as you said, they're coming in from the north. They're near the east end of what's obviously a very large hall.
Yes.
That we see that it runs away into darkness to the west, so they can't even see the other end.
No.
And there's this double line of pillars that I love this description. The fact that they're carved like the boles of trees, which are basically trunks of trees.
Right.
Big trees with boughs sort of upholding the roof.
Oh, beautiful.
They're smooth and black, and because of the fire, they're mirroring this red of the flames. Right. Really gorgeous image.
It really is. Now,
gorgeous and grim. Like, it's creepy gorgeous. It's not.
Yeah.
It's not beautiful.
No. And there is a reminder, though, that this was once truly a beautiful place.
Mm-hmm,
but now that beauty is marred by the reflection of the flames and all the things that are happening in there, including this massive fissure of fire that would have blocked their path had they come from the other direction. So that means that the fissure must be running north to south along the width rather than the length of the hall, and that it is to the west of where they're coming out.
Oh,
so if you imagine them coming in from the north into a hall that is an east-west running hall,
right?
This fissure would be
cutting across the middle,
running north-south, right? Cutting across the middle to the west of where they entered. So that's why it would have blocked their path, but doesn't now.
Bisecting across the long,
bisecting across the long, cutting it into two long halves.
Yeah,
that's correct. Right.
Very interesting. And yeah, amazing luck, if luck you call it,
Yeah,
that they
indeed.
managed to come out on the right side of this fire.
Boy, you're not kidding. That would have been a very short story.
Yeah, quite. And that's
Company
the end of the book,
comes to a
folks.
fiery end.
The Balrog
And the
gets
Balrog
the ring.
had a snack. Yeah, exactly.
Durin's Bane gets the ring.
And Durin's Bane versus Sauron in the next book.
That would be kind of cool. I would
Wouldn't it?
like to read that.
Yeah, the only problem is I still don't want to.
I don't want to
be in
read
the
the
world,
third book about what happens to
where
everybody
the winner ends up taking
Yeah.
everything else out. Right.
Yeah.
I agree.
Well, for now, they're on the right side of the fire, or at least they think
Correct.
they are. And the drums are continuing to pursue them.
Yeah, that's like the two
and-
paragraphs in the rest of this chapter we're not reading.
Right.
The drums. Yeah.
It is, isn't it? This is like
It
all
really
we're not
is.
going to read.
I'm pretty much sure that's it. I'd have to double check, but I think there might be one more paragraph. Nope, that's it. Those are the
Yeah.
only two paragraphs we're not reading.
But one of them is mostly just dooms. So just go
Yeah,
back to the
a lot of
last
dooms.
episode if you want to hear us read some more of those.
Exactly.
And they're hearing all these, not only the drums, but also these cries and horns from the west end of the hall.
Yeah, like they heard earlier when they were in the chamber of Mazarbul.
Mm-hmm.
So, all right. I'm going to go ahead and pick up there. This is the last race. Now for the last race, said Gandalf. If the sun is shining outside, we may still escape. After me. And I should apologize, by the way, for my Gandalf voice tonight. You probably can tell, folks, I'm getting over a cold. It does give me the advantage of that sort of Prancing Pony Podcast After Dark voice. But unfortunately,
It also gives you a very nice Gandalf is really weary voice. So I know it's painful.
which is fair.
But-
yeah.
But
but
thank you
still
for
just
all
be
you do for
patient.
this podcast, because I know it can't feel good.
The show must go on, man. He turned left and sped across the smooth floor of the hall. The distance was greater than it had looked. As they ran, they heard the beat and echo of many hurrying feet behind. A shrill yell went up. They had been seen. There was a ring and clash of steel. An arrow whistled over Frodo's head. Boromir laughed. They did not expect this, he said. The fire has cut them off. We are on the wrong side. Look ahead, called Gandalf. The bridge is near. It is dangerous and narrow. Suddenly, Frodo saw before him a black chasm. At the end of the hall, the floor vanished and fell to an unknown depth. The outer door could only be reached by a slender bridge of stone, without curb or rail, that spanned the chasm with one curving spring of 50 feet. It was an ancient defense of the dwarves against any enemy that might capture the first hall and the outer passages. They could only pass across it in single file. At the brink, Gandalf halted, and the others came up in a pack behind. Lead the way, Gimli, he said. Pivot and Merry next. Straight on and up the stair beyond the door. Arrows fell among them. One struck Frodo and sprang back. Another pierced Gandalf's hat and stuck there like a black feather. Frodo looked behind. Beyond the fire, he saw swarming black figures. There seemed to be hundreds of orcs. They brandished spears and scimitars, which shone red as blood in the firelight. Doom, doom, rolled the drum beats, growing louder and louder. Doom, doom. Well, there we go.
There we go.
My goodness. What a scene, huh?
Oh, it's just ramping up. I think
Mhm.
everybody can probably remember their first time reading this book. And
Yeah.
the way this scene just grabs you, it's probably the longest stretch of pure action that we've seen in the
Yeah.
book up to this point. And
Pages and pages of something that really only takes seconds to actually, take place.
yeah, you're not kidding. You're not kidding. It's like Tolkien is really kind of like zooming in, kind of taking the laser focus on this small span of time and
Yeah.
really spending his time describing it for us. And it
Yeah.
makes it so powerful.
It really does.
Now let's go back to the beginning of your reading. And
Sure.
Gandalf reminds us of something that it's good for us to keep in mind,
Yeah.
especially because it's about to be overturned in a big way in the next book,
Yes, it will. That's true.
that we might escape if it's still daytime. Because remember,
Right.
orcs don't like daylight. At least
No.
typically orcs have not liked daylight.
Right.
It is going to become a thing pretty
Mhm.
soon
Yeah.
that there are new breeds of orcs that are able to run in the daylight. But
Orcs
yeah,
2.0.
Orcs 2.0, exactly. But
In
as far
today's
as
patch, we've added, we've decreased the penalty for sunlight exposure.
thanks a lot, guys. Yeah.
Oh
Now
man,
the
they
orcs are
buffed the
imbalanced.
orcs, man.
Yeah, exactly.
Orcs need a nerf. All right.
So yeah, I mean that's kind of the world we're still in. They
Yeah.
as far as they know, we might escape if it's still daytime. We see some of this in The Hobbit too, don't we?
Right, we do.
When they finally escape from under the mountain, the goblins don't want to follow them.
No, they don't. And one of the things that we find will actually make their escape a little harder is that the distance is greater than it had looked. This is a massive hall. This is huge. So as Gandalf goes and runs as fast as he can, you see the camera sort of zoom out and this little making barely any progress across this huge hall. It's just massive.
Yeah.
Just a reminder of how big the dwarves make places, which is funny when you realize that they are the stunted people.
You're right.
But yeah.
They like a lot of room. They like leg room.
They do.
You know?
Yeah.
They shouldn't need as much leg room, but they like more.
Yeah, I don't know why they make these places with such massive headroom. But yeah, I know.
Agree. I don't know. Is it a complex? I don't know.
Maybe
Probably
a little
not.
Napoleon complex. Yeah, could be.
Maybe so. Yeah, little inferiority complex there.
Could be.
Well, anyway, back to the story. They're spotted. Unfortunately,
yes, they are. Yes, they
the
are.
orc can see them.
Right. They may not like the sun, but they still have eyeballs.
They still have eyeballs, and they are on the wrong side. So the fire is between them. Boromir, of course, is as ever impetuous, and it's just like, oh, we got this, yeah. A little bit premature.
Yeah, he needs
frankly.
to take something for his premature satisfaction. See a doctor for that. Thank goodness he's right, though. Right? I mean, really.
Well, and that's true. He's right, but again, they're not out of there yet. I mean,
no, not even close.
And again, I'm not going to let go of Boromir for his impetuousness or impetuosity.
Impetuosity.
Yeah, that's the
noun. I think so. That is the
sounds good.
You can almost see him turning around, putting his thumbs in his ears and waving his fingers. Na 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 na. You're
like
on the wrong
French
side of the
knight
fire.
in Holy Grail.
Yeah, exactly.
Go ahead before I taunt you a second time.
You silly wetting orcs.
So there's a bridge near, right?
Yeah. The bridge.
They're going to go across it, but of course Gandalf warns them that it's narrow and dangerous because apparently
you don't want to be running at full speed.
Yeah, and apparently not only do dwarves like a lot of space, but they don't like rails, right?
Apparently not. Parapets, rails, curbs, none of those things come to mind. This is definitely a workplace hazard. I think if this were built here, we'd be calling OSHA over this.
Yeah. I mean, normally you're not supposed to be running in the workplace, but normally you're not being pursued by orcs and gosh.
Gosh. I'm not even going to try that with my voice, by the way.
You shouldn't.
Want to know what
you should not.
So we see this danger, this really big chasm from Frodo's perspective. We'll see this a lot, specifically over the next few chapters, where Frodo sees this. We're constantly being brought back to his perspective. This massive chasm crossed by a 50-foot span of stone. This is no small thing. This is 15, 20 meters wide. Yeah. There's not a rail. There's not a parapet. It's only wide enough for one person to go across. You make one misstep and you are gone. This is an ancient defense.
Yeah.
Turin might have done well to pay attention to this.
To the chasm part of it, yeah.
To the well, not just to the chasm, but to the whole idea of a bridge that only can be passed in single file.
Oh, good point.
Instead of I don't know, some massive
instead of a giant
bridge
dragon
that would allow an army to cross, that would therefore allow a dragon to cross.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just thinking. So
well, sadly, Turin's long gone.
Yeah, he is. I don't know that he got a chance to see the architectural plans for Khazad-dûm.
No, sadly. So Gandalf still leading the party here. He sets the order for them to go across.
Well, don't take him away from the leadership role quite yet.
Foreshadowing.
I know. Come on now. Spoilers. All right.
So he wants Gimli to lead the way because, again, in for vision.
Right.
Pippin and Merry next, probably just to get them out of harm's way as quickly as possible.
Probably. I mean, I think that's the thing. He's sending the one across who's most likely to succeed, Gimli. He's a dwarf. He's got good footing, low center of gravity. He's probably used to this sort of thing, even if he's never been to this particular bridge. Followed by the ones who are, frankly, less likely to make it and not as helpful in a fight if one breaks out. So it wouldn't have made sense to say send Aragorn across first or Legolas.
Right.
Keep the warriors here.
Yeah.
And keep the ring bearer close because you don't want him to get across and then get grabbed by somebody else. So, yeah, this makes sense to send Gimli.
Probably want Frodo in the middle, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Protected the most protected.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you don't want Gimli to leave, but who else is going to lead the way?
Right.
He's the best one to lead. He's the one who's most likely to make it across without falling.
Right. I'm thinking Legolas, because we don't get the rest of the order, do we?
No, we don't.
Just
No.
Gimli, then Pippin and Merry. I'm thinking maybe Legolas after them.
Maybe, because he can at least shoot from range, right?
Exactly. Then maybe Sam and Frodo.
Yeah.
And then
Boromir,
put the men in the
Aragorn,
back.
and then Gandalf, right?
And Gandalf, yeah.
We know for sure that Boromir and Aragorn and Gandalf are the last three, because
That's true.
Boromir and Aragorn are the two that turn around. Mm-hmm.
Right. Well,
we'll get to that.
We will get to that very soon. Foreshadowing tonight on the Prancing Pony Podcast, where the foreshadowing actually involves shadow.
Oh,
I'm sorry.
But only one
I'm
shadow, not four
really
shadows.
not sorry for that. Well, okay.
Oh, I should be sorry for that one.
You should.
I should.
So, back to the story. Arrows start
Yes.
flying. One pierces Gandalf's hat and sticks
I
there like a
know.
black feather.
I love that little comedy. in the
Kind of
middle
love that
this.
image. It's kind of funny.
It is. It also tells you that it was a very close call. That
That's
he
true.
almost,
Well, yeah.
got skewered. But the fact is, there's a little bit of humor here. Here's Gandalf with an arrow in his floppy hat, and it's kind of funny.
Yeah.
Though realistically, unless the hat is somewhat rigid, I have a hard time buying that. How does the arrow pierce it instead of just take it off his head?
Maybe the hat. I mean, the hat's rigid enough. I mean, we're assuming that Gandalf has one of those pointy hats that we usually see him wearing, right? A pointy hat with a brim. This is what we usually.
But isn't it
picture
like
Gandalf
a
wearing.
felt sort of thing at the top? I mean, it's not.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm just thinking it's not like somebody's holding it up nice and tight so that
No,
the arrow
that's
can
true.
pierce it.
That's true. But if it's rigid enough to stand up in some sort of a point, then maybe it's rigid enough to support an
That's
arrow.
true.
I don't
Maybe,
know.
maybe.
It's not like piercing it is going to deflate it and suddenly it's.
No, I'm just thinking there's not enough tension for it to pierce. Like if you tried to pierce a shirt that's just hanging on a clothes hanger with an arrow, you're not going to.
I hear what
It's
you're
just going
saying.
to blow the shirt. It's going to
Yeah.
lift it up and blow right past it.
Yeah,
And I'm seeing that an arrow would probably actually just take the hat off rather than pierce the
I see
hat.
what you're saying. Yeah.
But it doesn't make for anywhere near as comic a scene
No.
as Gandalf's hat was shot off by an arrow.
Although I would love to see Gandalf lose his hat like Indiana Jones and then just get it
wouldn't that
back
be
at the
great?
last minute.
Right.
And when I say the last minute, I mean the last minute because foreshadowing.
We're in the last minute.
Yeah.
Just about. So we do get hundreds and hundreds of orcs with spears and, just as we saw last episode, scimitars.
Mhm.
So once again, we're reminded of that. And then the drums continue. Doom.
Yes.
Doom. So great moment. Boy, this is tension's building.
Tension is continuing to build. It's going to continue to build, and it's not going
Yes,
to
it
let up
will.
until.
Well,
I keep
yeah.
on foreshadowing. Yeah, I mean, it really, the tension is not going to let up until the dramatic
tension builds
moment
and builds
that we know
until
is
it
coming.
until it falls.
Until it breaks. Yeah.
No, until it falls. Then the tension falls.
Until it falls. Yes.
into the
exactly.
chasm. All
Yes.
right. I'm going to go ahead and have you read that Balrog arrives. Oh, boy.
Oh.
I'm jealous, but that's okay because I get the face off. So go for it.
All right. Legolas turned and set an arrow to the string, though it was a long shot for his small bow. He drew, but his hand fell, and the arrow slipped to the ground. He gave a cry of dismay and fear. 2 great trolls appeared. They bore great slabs of stone and flung them down to serve as gangways over the fire. But it was not the trolls that had filled the elf with terror. The ranks of the orcs had opened, and they crowded away as if they themselves were afraid. Something was coming up behind them. What it was could not be seen. It was like a great shadow, in the middle of which was a dark form, of man-shape maybe, yet greater,
Mm-hmm.
and a power and terror seemed to be in it, and to go before it. It came to the edge of the fire, and the light faded as if a cloud had bent over it. Then, with a rush, it leaped across the fissure. The flames roared up to greet it, and wreathed about it, and a black smoke swirled in the air. Its streaming mane kindled and blazed behind it. In its right hand was a blade like a stabbing tongue of fire. In its left it held a whip of many thongs. "Aye, wailed Legolas. "A Balrog! A Balrog is come!" Gimli stared with wide eyes. "Durin's bane!" he cried, and letting his axe fall, he covered his face. "A Balrog," muttered Gandalf. "Now I understand." He faltered and leaned heavily on his staff. "What an evil fortune, and I am already weary."
Oh, boy. Guess who's here? Yeah.
Ugh.
You know how we talked earlier about the perspective being from Frodo when we see the chasm and the bridge? Here,
Yeah.
we'll see at the beginning of the passage you read that the perspective switches to Legolas because he is the one who will first know and recognize what this is.
That is really interesting, because I hadn't even thought about that until you just now said that. And I'm remembering what Michael Drought said in that lecture that's on YouTube that we've referenced.
This kind of does fly in the face of that epistemological regime.
Yeah, because if folks remember, he talks about the fact that most scenes in Lord of the Rings are written from the perspective of the least knowledgeable observer.
Character. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's a lot of reasons for that he talks about. It's all about
of course, because the reader should be the least knowledgeable. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And it's all about that epistemic regime.
Right.
And it gives us a chance to learn along with the characters. But this time, he doesn't do that. He switches to Legolas's perspective because, as you said, Legolas is the only one who knows what this is. And Tolkien wants us to know what this is.
I mean, Gimli knows what it is too, but Legolas is going to be the one who recognizes it first.
I mean, Gimli sees it and realizes that this is the answer to all the riddles.
Right. He may not know that it's a Balrog. He just knows it's Durin's Bane.
He may not have experience of Balrogs.
It's Legolas who knows from all the
Legolas being
an
elf. I mean, Aragorn would have heard stories of Balrogs. Boromir probably has.
Yeah.
But Legolas is the one who probably knows the most about them.
Yeah.
From hearing stories of the elves in the First Age.
Probably from firsthand survivors. I mean, he certainly doesn't have firsthand experience, but he would have heard from those who might have firsthand experience.
Maybe. I don't know. Would there be any in Mirkwood?
Oh, yeah, that's a very good point. No.
I mean, Thranduil...
No. You've got the Sindarin elves at the very top, but most of them are Sylvan elves. No.
And Thranduil, I feel like, was born a little bit later.
Yeah, he might have... Orifer was the one, I think.
Right.
Is it Orifer? Thranduil's father, who founded?
Yeah, I think that was his name.
Who fled Beleriand at the end of the First Age, so he might have had firsthand experience.
He might have had some knowledge. But certainly being elves, they're going to have some knowledge of them.
They're going to have much more in terms of their tales and the legends and histories of the First Age.
Mm-hmm.
So he's about to fire this arrow when he just drops it. He cries out in dismay and fear.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. I mean, this is
Legolas, who doesn't have a lot of fear, right? This is a guy who's shooting people in the throat in the chamber of Mazarbul rather than resorting to using his close range weapons.
Yeah.
He's not afraid.
No, he's not. But this is a more terrifying thing than anybody is used to seeing. This is a terror from thousands of years ago. This is a terror of legend.
An ancient terror, a terror of legend. Yeah. That's a great way of putting it. This is something that, even though he's heard stories, there are probably bits and pieces of him that just think, oh, that's, good thing those aren't around anymore.
Yeah.
Right. Those are just stories.
Exactly.
Can't be really that bad. Oh, yeah, they are.
Yeah, exactly. And we'll talk more about what the Balrog is.
For about half the episode, yeah.
Yep.
I mean, because if you think we're moving through this quickly, it's because we have a sidebar this size. It's
because we know we have we're gonna come to a stop in a bit here. When
we will.
About some other stuff. So let's not forget that in addition to the Balrog, this terror from the ancient world that we're seeing, there's also a couple of huge trolls.
Yeah.
That are carrying stones that they're going to use as gangplanks to cross the fire.
Right. They've got that fissure that we talked about earlier, that north-south fissure that's to the west. Yeah.
Right.
So now they're coming from the east, laying the gangplanks.
So much for being separated from them by the fire, Boromir. This is why we told you not to get too excited and you didn't listen to us. But yeah, so the trolls throw these gangplanks across the fissure of fire. And then suddenly, we see the Balrog approaching as the orcs themselves shrink back in terror, backing away from it. And it's this moment of, and I know we've kind of gone ahead because everybody knows what's coming.
Right.
But I mean, put yourself in the perspective of a first-time reader. You're seeing these orcs shrink away in terror. What in the world is coming?
Right.
And they can't even see it, can they?
No, looking at it, it's this great shadow. You can't see it itself.
Mm-hmm.
There's a shadow, and in the middle of that shadow is this dark form. So it's black on black. Yeah. And this dark form is of man shape, maybe. So, some sort of a bipedal. Yeah. It's not a spider. It's not a fly. It's not a dragon. It's a man-shaped creature, but it's greater than that.
Mm-hmm.
Bigger than that. Not necessarily huge. In fact, we'll get to that later, that it grew a little bit. Originally, it was man's size as well.
Mm-hmm.
But this psychological element of it, I think, is what we need to touch on. This power and terror were in it and going before it. This thing projects power and terror. It is an intensely feared thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
by everybody, even by the orcs. Yeah.
And that's a very interesting thing about it, because you have to imagine that, first of all, like you said, it's dark on dark. So it's like there's a nothing there. It's like a hole there.
It's like Hot Black Desiato, like his ship.
Yeah, exactly. And for a second, I got a thought of like, it's like, how much more black can it be? And the answer is none. None more black. So it's dark.
This is Vanta black.
It's like that
Vanta black paint. Have you heard about that? Right, this paint that like so black that it absorbs the light.
It like absorbs all light, and it just reflects nothing. It's like a black hole.
Like you can't even see a shape. You can paint a 3-dimensional object and it looks flat because there's no. That's the weirdest thing.
It doesn't reflect any light.
Right.
Yeah.
It's the weirdest thing.
I mean,
so
and that's what I'm imagining here. That's what I'm imagining is just like a black hole in the world where a shape of something should be.
If I can borrow a word from the first age, an unlight.
Yeah, that's perfect.
It's got that very feeling that we get with Ungoliant in terms of darkness as a thing in itself, as opposed to darkness being the absence of light. It does have that feel, doesn't it?
Exactly. Yeah. It is. I think it's a perfect way of putting it. It's an unlight, and it's not only the nothing that you see there that's terrifying, but it's projecting a terror from it as well. There's a terror that goes before it. It has this power to create terror where it goes.
Yeah, I'm thinking of that in D&D terms, right? You know, there's some sort of sphere.
Yeah, like a sphere of
20 meters.
Of fear, yeah.
You know, when you're within 20 meters, roll your morale.
Yeah, roll to save. If you don't save, you have to run away.
Right.
Yeah.
And then if you get to 10 meters, you got to roll again, this time with a bigger modifier. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the kind of thing we're talking about here. So
thing.
It's terrifying to look at, and it's just terrifying to be around.
If I could blend mythologies here, I don't know if I've ever brought in Warhammer 40K, but I wonder what a Space Marine would do. They know no fear. They don't even have to make morale checks.
I don't know Warhammer, man. I'm sorry.
No, I know.
I've got friends who know it.
Handful of people who do. Space Marine versus Balrog would be an interesting fight, I think. So anyway.
Yeah. It's like the creature of fear versus somebody who knows no fear.
Right.
Like unstoppable object versus
immovable.
What's the word?
Unstoppable object versus immovable object. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well, let's get back to this Balrog.
I think we should.
It approaches the fire and the light fades. And then it jumps. It leaps.
Yeah.
Now the leap of Balrog, I suppose, is not quite as renowned as the leap of Baron, but it's a mighty leap nonetheless.
It is, but it is only a leap. He doesn't fly across, I'll have you know.
Interesting.
Just observe that.
Very,
it doesn't
very
fly across the fissure.
No.
Just so
I wonder why.
I don't know.
We'll get back to that.
Yeah, you'd think. All right.
But the description does not let up. We get, as it's leaping across, we get these flames actually roaring up to greet it.
Yeah.
It's like,
Daddy!
I mean, there is some sort of, it almost seems as there's some sort of attractive power here.
Yeah, there is an affinity, no doubt about it.
Yeah, it's bringing the flames up to meet it, and then the flames wreathe about it, and this black smoke swirls in the air.
Oh, yeah.
And its hair, its mane kindles and blazes behind it.
Ooh, that's going to smell good.
Burning Balrog hair.
You ever singed your hair? Yeah, exactly.
Arguably worse than burning human hair. Yeah.
Oh, I'm certain it would be.
Because I'm sure it hasn't been washed since the beginning
first
of time.
age. Right.
Yeah.
So it's trailing behind. It's a beautiful image. I mean, I want to see the leap of the Balrog illustrated.
It is a beautiful image, and it's a very metal image. You know, this long
it is
hair
metal,
just,
isn't it?
Like, you know.
Yeah. You're not kidding.
This is the image you want painted on your van.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Your party van that you had in the 70s. You want like
with
the
big
Balrog
round
leaping
porthole
across
window
with the streaming hair.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Agreed.
And you got like "Burnin' for You" by Blue Oyster Cult blaring out the speakers.
Oh man, yeah. There you go. Okay. Oh, there's another song for the playlist, by the way.
There you go. Yeah,
that's been a great addition. We should throw.
I mean, if you're gonna bring Blue Oyster Cult onto the show, let's do it when the Balrog appears.
Don't fear the Reaper, man.
Yep.
So he's got this tongue of fire in his right hand, a flaming sword. This is. We'll see more of that in a moment. But the thing here is he's also got the whip of many thongs. Sorry. Remember when we had dwarves and
at least he doesn't have a thong and many whips.
There you go. A whip of many thongs. I'm picturing a whip with, well, anyway.
Yeah, no, let's just leave
it
there.
And I noticed that it's in his left hand. So this guy's a dual wielding, Maya here.
What is it with Maiar and dual wielding? Because we see Gandalf dual
I
wield
know.
too, don't we?
Yeah, exactly.
We saw it
he
before,
does.
and we'll see it again.
Yeah, nobody seems to be sword and board anymore. What's up with that?
Yeah, well, they're Maiar. They got their own rules.
That's true.
As we discussed, Legolas recognizes this thing right away. He knows it's a Balrog. Gimli at least recognizes, oh, this is Durin's Bane. This must be the thing that all the stories were talking about.
Yeah. I do find it interesting, though, that his response is to let his axe fall and then cover his face. I would think keep the axe and run the other way would be my first instinctual reaction. But I understand. For him, it's like all hope is gone.
I think he's petrified with fear.
Totally. Remember, that's the thing. This has power and terror going before it.
Letting the axe fall that's the moment of despair.
That's the last thing a dwarf would do. You're right. This is definitely despair, no doubt about it.
He's giving up the fight. He's covering his face. It's like, well, death is coming for me. I'm just
I don't want to see it come.
I don't want to see it come.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, man.
This is a despair moment. Sure.
Yeah. And Gandalf, boy, his reaction, now he understands. Now he gets it. And this, of course, confirms our mistake from a few episodes ago. It really makes it clear.
Yeah, again, I think we talked about this, but he knew something was down here. But this moment right here tells us for sure that he clearly did not know it was this.
Right. But it does explain everything. It explains the powerful magia that he encountered earlier, the counter spell on closing the door, and that deep sense of evil on the other side.
And the idea that he met his match. He used those words.
Yeah, he was almost destroyed. He was almost defeated. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Now, his comment here about how he's already weary, that tells us that he knows that this is his fight. You know, he can't really rely on the others to do anything here.
This foe is beyond them.
Yes, exactly. He has to do it himself, tired or not. And he's saddened by the fact that he has to do it as tired as he is. Yeah.
Right. I mean, he knows that maybe there'd be a good chance of success if he were fresh.
If he were at full strength. Sure.
Right. Of course. But, he's at least a few potions shy on both meters, and he's
exactly.
He's really struggling, and he's exhausted.
No, dude, you can't attempt the Balrog quest at 50 health and 50 mana. You just don't do it.
You got to go rest first. You know, take a potion.
Go back to town, get some potions, rest up,
heal up,
then come back.
Yeah, have somebody throw you a buff, but So now we're gonna get to the moment. We're gonna get to the face-off, aren't we?
Yes, we are. This is, whew.
Oh boy.
I'm excited because I've been waiting to get to this moment for years, honestly.
Yes,
and,
pretty much since we started the show.
And it's such a great moment, and I'm looking forward to it.
I am too. The dark figure streaming with fire raced towards them. The orcs yelled and poured over the stone gangways. Then Boromir raised his horn and blew. Loud the challenge rang and bellowed like the shout of many throats under the cavernous roof. For a moment, the orcs quailed, and the fiery shadow halted. Then the echoes died as suddenly as a flame blown out by a dark wind, and the enemy advanced again. "Over the bridge!" cried Gandalf, recalling his strength. "Fly! This is a foe beyond any of you! I must hold the narrow way! Fly!" Aragorn and Boromir did not heed the command, but still held their ground side by side behind Gandalf at the far end of the bridge. The others halted just within the doorway at the hall's end and turned, unable to leave their leader to face the enemy alone. The Balrog reached the bridge. Gandalf stood in the middle of the span, leaning on the staff in his left hand, but in his other hand Glamdring gleamed, cold and white. His enemy halted again, facing him, and the shadow about it reached out like two vast wings. It raised the whip, and the thongs whined and cracked. Fire came from its nostrils. But Gandalf stood firm. "You cannot pass," he said. The orcs stood still, and a dead silence fell. "I am a servant of the secret fire, wielder of the flame of Arnor. You cannot pass. The dark fire will not avail you, flame of Udun. Go back to the shadow. You cannot pass." The Balrog made no answer. The fire in it seemed to die, but the darkness grew. It stepped forward slowly onto the bridge, and suddenly it drew itself up to a great height, and its wings were spread from wall to wall. But still Gandalf could be seen, glimmering in the gloom. He seemed small, and altogether alone, gray and bent like a wizened tree before the onset of a storm. From out of the shadow, a red sword leaped flaming. Glamdring glittered white in answer. There was a ringing clash and a stab of white fire. The Balrog fell back, and its sword flew up in molten fragments. The wizard swayed on the bridge, stepped back a pace, and then again stood still. "You cannot pass," he said. With a bound, the Balrog leaped full upon the bridge. Its whip whirled and hissed. "He cannot stand alone," cried Aragorn suddenly, and ran back along the bridge. "Elendil," he shouted, "I am with you, Gandalf." "Gondor!" cried Boromir, and leaped after him. At that moment, Gandalf lifted his staff, and crying aloud, he smote the bridge before him. The staff broke asunder and fell from his hand. A blinding sheet of white flame sprang up. The bridge cracked. Right at the Balrog's feet it broke, and the stone upon which it stood crashed into the gulf, while the rest remained, poised, quivering like a tongue of rock thrust out into emptiness. With a terrible cry, the Balrog fell forward, and its shadow plunged down and vanished. But even as it fell, it swung its whip, and the thongs lashed and curled about the wizard's knees, dragging him to the brink. He staggered and fell, grasped vainly at the stone, and slid into the abyss. "Fly, you fools!" he cried, and was gone.
Man.
Wow.
That is one of those scenes that...
You never forget it. It's
you
one
never
of
forget
the iconic scenes.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
Even in the movie, I remember people I knew who went to go see the movie for...
Yeah.
Just going to see the movie for the first time.
Right.
Knew nothing about the books. I remember people talking about this scene. People who had no connection to the books whatsoever.
Right.
This scene was incredibly powerful to people.
Mm-hmm.
I even remember
Tears.
somebody telling me...
People were crying.
Yeah. Somebody said... I distinctly remember somebody saying, "Yeah, I cried when the old dude died." You know, it's like...
the old dude.
Yeah, and that tells me, like, you may not have really connected to the movie enough to learn characters' names or anything like that, but this scene was powerful enough for you to have an emotional reaction to.
Exactly.
And it is a powerful scene in the movie. The movie does it really well. I have to give Peter Jackson props for how he did it.
Yeah.
It's still more powerful in the book, just because
it is more powerful.
It's just the language Tolkien uses and the alliteration and the things that we see
and the building of tension. You know, cinema moves at 1 second per 1 second, and it's you can't ratchet up the tension super slowly.
Yeah,
and have that much action in a scene.
Right. Tolkien's use of language and the way he pauses over these descriptions.
Yeah, exactly.
He puts the action in slow motion.
But it was pretty fantastically done, I will say. The music helped, of course. Shore's score at this point is just phenomenal, leading to this moment. And, then we get the silence, of course, when Gandalf falls.
Yeah.
Amazing moment. But let's go ahead and discuss this passage. There's a lot here, of course, as we always say, but it's really important. So,
let's start right away with just the pace of the action, in this scene. Although we're talking about things kind of going into slow motion here, the Balrog is moving fast, isn't it? It is streaming with fire and racing towards them.
Right. Followed by the hordes
coming
of orcs.
After it,
right. Exactly.
Yelling and pouring over the gangways. This is not the stand still face off moment yet. This
not
is
yet, no.
Racing towards them.
Right, because this is the gangplanks over the fissure of fire. They're not quite to the single.
They're not quite
bridge.
To the standoff. Yeah.
Right. But boy, Boromir finally gets a chance properly, appropriately, to blow his horn, and
this
is
the
works.
time to do it. It does. It has exactly
for
the
a moment.
It
works. The orcs quail. Even the Balrog halts.
Mm-hmm.
But there's something magical about the way the echoes stop, isn't it?
I think that's really interesting.
They don't seem to die unnaturally.
Yeah, as a flame blown up by a dark wind, there's an idea that it's silenced somehow.
Yeah, the Balrog somehow quells the echo.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
And the enemy keeps coming.
Mm-hmm.
Gandalf gathers his strength,
which is
tells
important.
them fly, not for the last time. Fly,
right?
As in flee.
As in run away.
Yeah,
not sprout wings and leave. Run away. Go, brave Sir Robins, all of you. Yes.
Yeah. This is a foe beyond any of you. This is my fight. I got to do this.
None of you have the power to defeat this.
Mhm.
But Aragorn and Boromir are valiant. They're going to stay anyway, right? They have to stay behind Gandalf because the bridge is too narrow for them to stand
Right.
three abreast. But they come back to be a part of the action. The others stop at the end of the hall and turn around. They want to at least be a part of this.
Let's talk about the fellowship theme that you see
Yeah.
in this paragraph.
Boy,
I mean,
you're not kidding.
you know, we expect Aragorn and Boromir, being the valiant men that they are, to stand
Yes.
beside their leader and fight with
And
him.
Gimli's already too far gone, remember, because
Yeah.
he led Merry and Pippin across.
Yeah.
So he needs
But the
to
rest
stay
of
on the
them,
other side.
the rest of them are unable to leave, even though they're terrified and they know
Yeah.
that they can't do anything. They can't leave Gandalf alone. They have to watch
No.
at least.
Yeah, they stop at the end and they watch.
Mm-hmm. And then we get the face-off. The Balrog
Right.
actually reaches the bridge. Gandalf is standing in the middle of it. Amazing tableau of words here.
Yeah, boy, you're not kidding. Gandalf's dual wielding too, right? He's got his staff
Yeah.
in the left. He's got Glamdring in the right, and it's gleaming, this cold and white. It made me think a little bit of now the name of it left me. Fingolfin's sword, Ringil.
Oh, Ringil. Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
as he faces off against Morgoth, this sort of
Mhm.
cold, burning flame.
Yeah.
But boy, this is quite a moment.
And he is dual wielding.
Yeah,
It's also
he is.
worth noting that he is leaning on his staff.
Yes. Well, earlier he was
So-
leaning heavily on it, wasn't he?
True.
There was a moment in, I think, your earlier reading, maybe it was
Yeah.
mine, I don't recall now, where he leaned heavily.
Yeah. We've talked about how weary he is already.
Oh, he's very tired, yeah.
And he's still weary, but
Mhm.
he's kind of mustering his strength, but he's still leaning on the staff a bit. So
Yeah.
let's see that for what it is. He's dual wielding, but it's taking everything he's got.
Every ounce, yeah, no doubt. He knows this. There's nothing to hold back in reserve here.
Mhm.
All or nothing
Yeah,
at this point.
That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. This is where he's going to spend himself,
Mhm.
you know.
Indeed, he does, and he knows that. I want to pull in something from one of the letters here. This is from letter 156. He's talking about the wizards. He's talking about Gandalf specifically.
Mm-hmm.
And he says that Gandalf alone fully passes the tests, on a moral plane anyway. Tolkien admits that Gandalf makes mistakes of judgment. Back to Tolkien's words, for in his condition, it was for him, by condition he means his incarnate condition, I should say, not just his fatigue. I know we're talking about how tired he is, but we're talking about the fact that he's a Maya in
that
incarnate
he's
form.
incarnate. Yeah, there's a couple of paragraphs about the incarnation of the Maya.
Which is different because Balrog is not. I mean, the Balrog may be stuck in this form, as we'll talk about,
Mm-hmm.
but he's not incarnate like the wizards are. So
Correct.
anyway,
Yeah.
for in his condition, meaning he's still mortal, it was for him a sacrifice to perish on the bridge, spoilers, in defense of his companions, less perhaps than for a mortal man or hobbit, since he had a far greater inner power than they, but also more, since it was a humbling, an abnegation of himself in conformity to the rules with a capital R. For all he could know at that moment, he was the only person who could direct the resistance to Sauron successfully, and all his mission was vain. He was handing over to the authority, capital A, that ordained the rules, capital R, and giving up personal hope of success. That, I should say, is what the authority wished as a set-off to Saruman. The wizards as such had failed, or if you like, the crisis had become too grave and needed an enhancement of power. So Gandalf sacrificed himself, was accepted and enhanced, and returned. And we'll get to more of that, of course, and cover that in much more depth when Gandalf does return, spoilers,
In the next season.
right, in the next season.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, that is a great call out. I'm glad you brought
Isn't
that
it?
in because
yeah,
it shows that Gandalf is not just sacrificing his own life here, his own incarnate
No.
life here. He's sacrificing his mission.
yeah. He is trusting to the authority that
Yeah.
somehow his mission will still be completed even though he's no longer here to complete it.
Yeah, right, exactly. I shouldn't say he's sacrificing the mission. He's sacrificing his personal involvement in the mission.
Right.
I joked about this a couple of episodes ago. This is like Iluvatar, take the wheel. You know,
Right,
this
it really is. This is a literal.
I have to
Still
do
cracks
this.
me up, by the way. I love that line. I want to write a song.
He's like he really is. That's what he's doing. He's saying, okay, I'm going to relinquish my control over the situation, and I'm going to trust that the authority is going to take care of us. And that's what Tolkien means when he says authority with a capital A. He's talking about Iluvatar.
He's talking about Iluvatar, and we'll explore that along with the whole Gandalf 2.0 discussion when we encounter Gandalf the White later on.
Indeed.
I love that moment when he remembers. Oh yes, Gandalf. That was the name.
Yes.
It's like 2.0. I mean, he fully doesn't even remember.
It has to come back to him. Yeah.
It does. It does.
He has to
hasn't been called it.
Kind of pull it back. Yeah.
Yeah, he really does. All right.
But
well,
for
let's
now,
go ahead and get back to this face-off.
Yeah.
It's great stuff.
Yeah. So this is the sacrifice he's about to make here, but we're not there yet. I mean, we've read
not
but
quite.
we haven't talked about it yet. So the Balrog stops, and this is the face-off moment on the bridge. He's facing Gandalf. The shadow reaches out.
Yeah.
And he raises the whip.
Yeah.
And this is not a single whip. This is like a cat o' nine tails kind of thing, right?
Right. It's the many thongs, right? We talked about the whip of many thongs. Mm-hmm.
Right. And he's raising this, and the fire comes out of his nostrils.
This is a threat.
Powerful.
Yeah. This is intimidation, right?
Yeah.
He automatically makes his intimidation roll. There's
totally.
And your save is you got to roll a natural 20 or you're not going to succeed.
But is Gandalf intimidated?
That's the thing. He rolls a natural 20. He is unmoved.
Yep.
Unmoved. Stood in the middle of the span. And he stood firm. Fire came from his nostrils, but Gandalf stood firm. And he denies passage, but he denies passage on the authority of Iluvatar himself. Mm-hmm. So let's take a little bit of a break and talk about that. I want to talk about the secret fire. I want to talk about Anor, the flame of Anor, and I want to talk about the flame of Udun. So first, let's talk about the secret fire. In the Ainulindalë, we talked a lot about the flame imperishable, which Tolkien would later say appears to mean the creative activity of Eru, in some sense distinct from or within him, by which things could be given a real and independent, though derivative and created, existence. That's a great quote. Chew through that. Rewind a few seconds if you need to, because that's deep, especially if you weren't with us in season 1. Yeah. Now, we tried to distinguish unsuccessfully, I tried to distinguish unsuccessfully between the flame imperishable and the secret fire, and I still like where I went with that, but then Tolkien goes and uses the phrase secret fire as a synonym for flame imperishable in the Valaquenta.
It was a good thought. I mean, you're trying to look at, I mean, we generally assume that Tolkien doesn't use language accidentally. So when he uses different phrases, you want to look for meaning in that. But obviously in this case, it was not right.
Yeah, I mean, even this quote that I just read appears to be the creative activity of Eru, by which things could be given that real and independent existence, seems to support my original theory, the idea that the flame imperishable is the source of creative activity, and the secret fire is a thing put in those things that are created. But in Valaquenta, we learned that they are the same thing. So I think
it's the difference between, like, I know exactly what you're saying. It's like you're thinking the secret fire is a derivative of the flame imperishable. It's like an instance of the flame
secret fire is the evidence of the flame imperishable. If I possess the flame imperishable and I possess it in and of myself, only myself, as Eru Iluvatar, and I create something, that thing now has a secret fire in it.
Right.
But it's like the flame imperishable because it can't turn around and create things with the secret fire of its own.
No.
Hence, Aule's creation has to be imbued with the secret fire, or it won't be independent, even that's derivative and created.
But obviously Tolkien is saying those two things are the same. He's
somehow they're the same,
The candle that's lit from the flame is the same as the flame
still
itself.
The same flame, right. Mm-hmm. So here's the line that confirms that. I'm just going to go ahead and confess my error. Therefore Iluvatar gave to their vision being and set it amid the void, and the secret fire was sent to burn at the heart of the world, and it was called Ea. Well, in Ainulindalë, it was the flame imperishable that Iluvatar said shall be at the heart of the world. So, obviously it's the same thing. And that's what Gandalf is referring to here, the creative activity of Eru that allows for real existence. That's what he means. I am a servant of the creative activity of the one that allows for genuine existence.
Absolutely. Well, now let's talk about another flame, Anor, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
In the Silmarillion, we learned that Anar is one of the names of the sun.
Right.
And Anor is just another form of that name. Tolkien says in the nomenclature that Anor means sun.
And we know that with Minas Anor, right? Because that was before Minas Tirith's name previously was Minas Anor, the Tower of the Sun versus
the Tower of the
Minas
Sun,
Ithil.
just like Minas Ithil was the Tower of the Moon.
Right.
Yeah. And what we're looking at here is the Sindarin form of the name Anor,
right,
as opposed to Anar, which is the Quenya form.
Right.
Now, Hammond and Skull find it odd that Gandalf would reference the sun here, given what he says, first of all, about Gandalf being a servant of the secret fire, which is sort of the greater flame, right?
Well, right.
And then the fact that Tolkien says in the famous letter to Milton Waldman, whose number I don't even have to give anymore, that its light was derived from the trees only after they are sullied by evil. So, we've talked about this before, the idea that the sun is a next best, how does he put it? He says it's a second best thing.
It is a second best thing, right? It's the light after evil has come and destroyed the light.
Right. And if we look at it in terms of refracting, the way Verlin Flieger likes to look, it's like the sun came from the trees came after the lamps,
Right.
and all of them are lesser than the fire of Iluvatar, the secret fire. So it does seem interesting here that Gandalf refers to himself as a wielder of the flame of Anor. But they reference Tolkien's efforts to fix his creation in terms of the Legend of the Sun and Moon, and the fact that this effort was already underway by the time this part of the story had been written.
That makes sense. Yeah, he was definitely at that point already trying to make that fix to the mythology when he got into this part of the story. Now, just 2 episodes ago in 157, we were discussing whether Tolkien had started to work on some of that myths transformed material, and whether that influenced the idea that no stain yet on the moon was seen in Gimli's Song of Durin. And we thought that didn't influence it because the staining would have happened long before Durin's awakening.
Right. And that time issue of the poem notwithstanding, I mean, it does seem like he was at least working on that material. Yeah. So it must have influenced this scene, and probably that line of the poem as well.
Exactly.
Even though the timeline doesn't quite work out.
Right. Now, finally, Udun, we're going to move on to the third kind of odd thing here, the unique thing in
the
this
third flame that we've got here.
Right.
Yeah.
Is defined by Tolkien as dark pit, and it refers to Morgoth's halls that were beneath Thangorodrim. Now, the 1966 Index also defines Udun as hell, certainly strengthening the parallel of Balrog to demon.
Yeah, it's interesting that Tolkien explains Udun as being the halls beneath Thangorodrim, because Udun is actually the Sindarin form of Utumno, which anybody who was with us in Season 1 remembers that was Melkor's original citadel. It was actually destroyed when the elves awakened and the Valar made war on him.
Right.
And he ended up, when he came back, he ended up going to Angband, which was his other fortress. That was the one beneath Thangorodrim, which was further to the west.
Right.
So I wonder what's going on here when Tolkien talks about Udun being below Thangorodrim.
Right. I mean, maybe he's simplifying the complex mythology for Lord of the Rings readers. Maybe he hadn't finalized it. Maybe he's rethinking the original geography. I don't know.
Maybe so. I think regardless of those details, I think the main thing that we need to take from Gandalf's words here are that this scene is a showdown between really 2 kinds of fire. There's the fire of Anor, and I guess really the secret fire too, right? And we're talking about the sun and Aryan and the fire of life, the fire that illuminates, the holy fire of Iluvatar, versus the fire of Udun, which is Melkor's fire. It's hellfire. It's the fire that destroys or that punishes. And so that's really what Gandalf is saying here. He's talking about, you've got your evil fire. I've got my holy fire. Let's see what we can do. Let's go, bro.
Bring it.
That's kind of what's going on. Yeah, exactly. Bring it. Come at me.
Gandalf, come at me, bro.
Come at me, bro. This is
we could just do like one of those nice, really massively deep artistic illustrations of Balrog versus Gandalf on the bridge, and just text underneath. Come at me,
just
bro.
Put a meme text at the bottom. Come at me, bro.
There you go.
Somebody probably has done it with like a movie scene.
Probably. Everything I think of has already been done. That's kind of the problem.
I still got a few ideas, but I just don't have time to do them.
Don't talk about them on the show because somebody else will do it. Because
somebody will do them
to get around to it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. All right.
So, the Balrog makes no answer. The fire in it does seem to die, though, doesn't it?
But
the darkness grows.
That's the thing. That's the thing. I think it realizes, okay, fine, my fire won't be able to defeat your fire, but my darkness, that's another story.
I think that's a good point. Yeah. So it steps onto the bridge. The shadow spreads further.
It does spread further. In fact, we'll get to the description of that spreading shadow later. But for now, I want to mention what happens with Gandalf. I love this. Gandalf glimmering in the gloom. We get that alliteration again.
Boy, that is some alliteration right there. Yep.
Oh, and it's so beautiful. And it totally, if we talk about the sword Glamdring, with the cold gleam reminding me of Ringil, this like now Ringil totally reminds me now of Fingolfin facing off against Morgoth.
Yeah.
This is a total replica of that scene. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, in a terrifying way, but yeah.
And you do get a similar kind of David and Goliath feel from the showdown, don't you?
You do. It's a little more evenly matched because it's now you got Maya versus Maya.
Yeah, that's true. And I guess maybe I'm tainted by movie scenes and a lot of scenes that have shown the Balrog as being way too big,
gigantic, right? Way too big.
Yeah.
He's not that big.
Yeah, but I think in terms of the apparent power of the scene is what I'm thinking of here, because you see Gandalf is described as gray and bent,
Right.
like a tree before a storm.
Mm-hmm.
And now, of course, he's a tree that's seen and survived many storms before.
Right, that's the point. He's not one of these trees that gets blown over in the first storm because he doesn't know how to bend. Yeah,
that's true. But gray and bent is sort of a misleading, misleading description, because it does kind of make you think, oh man, he's done for.
Right. It does sort of set the stage for disappointment. And boy, the Balrog, I think, sees that and thinks this is his time, and it's sudden, isn't it? It's just immediate. Out of the shadow, the sword leaps flaming, boom, and Glamdring glitters in answer. I love what happens here. This is a blink and you miss it moment. The Balrog falls back from that defense, and his sword is gone.
Broken.
Gone.
Yep.
Molten fragments just shattering through the air.
Yeah.
Clearly, the flame of Anor is stronger than the fire of Udun. Yeah.
And Gandalf steps back too. He takes a pace back. And then he stands
Swayed
still.
a little bit, right?
But then he stands still again.
Right.
And he repeats the denial of passage. You cannot pass.
Yeah. Yeah, we should talk about that a little bit, huh?
Yeah, I think we did talk about this in a Barlowman's Bag segment once before. The difference between you shall not pass, which is in the movie and arguably sort of burned into the minds of everybody when they think of this
Ian
scene.
McKellen's spectacular delivery, which I tried desperately to avoid sounding like I was duplicating.
I think you succeeded.
I hope so.
But there is a difference between you shall not pass and you cannot pass, which is what we see here.
Right.
And that was exactly what that question was about. What does the movie's you shall not pass mean versus you cannot pass? And if I recall correctly, where we landed is you cannot pass implies permission.
Authority.
It implies or lack of permission.
Exactly.
It's implying that Gandalf has the authority to say you cannot pass.
That's
you are
right.
not allowed.
I am here as a servant of Eru Ilúvatar himself.
Yeah.
And under his authority,
our
I deny
dad,
you passage. That's right.
Our literal father, because we are both the offspring of his thought.
That's right.
Has given me the authority to. I'm the big brother.
He's left the house. I'm the
Dad
big brother.
Dad put me in charge. And you are not allowed to do this.
Oh, man. I'm waiting for the day that my daughter tells me what my son told her to do when he's in charge.
Yeah. Whereas you shall not pass is definitely there's a power behind it. It's saying that I'm going to stop you from passing no matter what you do. Right. But there's a difference between preventing somebody from doing something and telling them with authority that they are not allowed to do so.
That's right. I think shall not pass is certainly more theatrical, certainly more cinematic, but it's not quite the same. I also thought it's interesting in this case, we get you cannot pass a couple of times with just a period. They're spoken, right? He says, you cannot pass, he said. And then go back to the shadow, ! You cannot pass, period. But now, after this, you cannot pass, ! This is I'm a reminder. You don't have authority. You don't have permission.
Yeah.
You cannot do this. So don't.
Yeah. Well, I mean, any parent knows that if you have to repeat yourself, you're
yeah.
issuing a command that comes from just authority.
Gandalf's about to count to 3.
Yeah, exactly. The second or third time, that exclamation mark is going to come out.
Yes, it will. Yes, it will.
And I think that's the really interesting thing about cannot versus shall not is you said shall not is cinematic. I think it is cinematic in the sense that it implies a battle of wills. It implies it implies
mano
that
a mano.
Exactly. I'm gonna stop you from doing this. You cannot implies that I am in a position of authority over you. And
I can deny you the
do
permission to do this. Right.
Yeah.
Not that the Balrog cares about permission. I haven't listened to Dad in decades, man. You know, he doesn't listen to what
decades
Dad
at
has
least,
to say.
yeah.
Decades of millennia, but yeah.
Thousands of decades, yeah.
Right.
So now the Balrog is relying on the whip because the sword has been shattered.
Yeah. I have a surprise for you. I'm not left-handed.
I knew that was coming.
Of course. So the whip, interestingly, does seem to be the primary weapon of the Balrogs throughout the Legendarium. So the loss of its sword really isn't a problem. It's like he led with his weakest weapon. We have from the Silmarillion, we have at least 3 quotes that talk about that. They were cloaked in darkness and terror went before them, which we also see here. They had whips of flame.
That's right. And then elsewhere we get, with their whips of flame, they smote asunder the webs of Ungoliant.
Right.
And still later, when Fingon is fighting Gothmog, we get, and Fingon fought with Gothmog until another Balrog came behind and cast a thong of fire about him.
Right. So, I mean, clearly this is sort of their go-to weapon.
Yeah.
So it's not a surprise that he led with the sword. It's like, oh, well, that doesn't work. Let me use what I'm used to.
Yeah. The Inigo Montoya quote is kind of perfect now that I'm thinking about it.
Yeah, it really is. Oh, well, I'll just use my other hand now.
Exactly.
Aragorn and Boromir go into the fray. Of course they do. And that's when Gandalf, apparently using his staff's self-destruct power, smites the bridge. Manufacture rules dictate I cannot be captured.
Is it that, or is... I think that there's something going on with wizard staffs. I think we need to talk about this in a future episode.
I know we will.
I think there's
I don't know. The staff breaks asunder when he smites the bridge. I think this is the last thing this staff can do. It is taking all of its power. It is going to break the staff to do it.
Yes, I agree.
It's sort of a self-destruct power in a way.
There's so much power. Yeah, it's not like he's pressing the self-destruct button. There's so much power that's passing through the staff that it breaks. Yeah, that's what I think. It cannot
survive. Right. And I know. I mean, I'm joking about the actual self-destruct power because there's no countdown timer.
Of course. So
if it was a self-destruct timer, there'd be a timer.
Not a very well-designed self-destruct because
push the button. Oops, boom.
Yeah.
So he smites the bridge. The staff breaks and falls. And we will, like you said, talk about this in a future episode.
Yeah. And then the bridge cracks and breaks.
Yeah. Oh,
and then the Balrog falls.
Yeah.
Forward into the chasm and vanishes.
Right.
But as it's going down, we can all see it.
Primary weapon. If only he'd used the whip first and had to rely on his sword, he wouldn't have been able to bring Gandalf down. Yeah.
I know. Wow.
Interesting.
That's an interesting what if. But
yeah.
No, it's got the whip. It swings the whip one last time, drags Gandalf to the brink.
And as he falls, that's when he calls out, "Fly, you fools." Not as he's gripping and holding on for the last moment. He's already fallen. And it's as he's falling, he's saying, "Fly, you fools." He knows this is the last chance I have to call them fools, and so I shall.
Especially you, Pippin!
Yeah, fly, you fools!
You fool of a took!
Pippin, you too! That's part of the... You can't quite hear it from here. That's what he says.
Yeah.
Fly, you fools, and make sure Pippin listens. Yeah. He's giving one last piece of counsel. It's what Gandalf does best, is give counsel.
It's true, yeah.
And, he doesn't scream. You don't hear the Wilhelm scream. You don't hear him saying, "I'm going to catch you, Balrog." He's saying to the rest of the company, "Get out of here, run."
Well, and seriously, because he is sacrificing himself so that they can go on.
Right, so that the
he goes down into the chasm, and then the orcs get them.
Oh, yeah.
It's all for
naught.
His
sacrifice is in vain, right.
Yeah.
Get out.
So get out of here. Don't let me die in vain is basically what he's saying.
Mm-hmm. Valid point.
Now, Hammond and Skull make an interesting observation.
Mm-hmm.
In The Hobbit, Gandalf leaves Bilbo and the dwarves, only to rejoin them near the end of their journey. Now, as he's gone, Bilbo manages to grow quite a bit in terms of his abilities. It's kind of a classic, sort of a Joseph Campbell trope, isn't it? Sort of separating the hero from the mentor.
Yeah, that is classic. You're right.
Here, Hammond and Skull point out, Tolkien removes Gandalf twice for purposes of the story. Near the beginning, so that Frodo and his companions have to make the journey to Rivendell without the wizard's support. And again in Book 2, so that Frodo and Sam travel on their own into Mordor.
That's right, but there's more. They point us to the Return of the Shadow to show how Tolkien had already imagined this for Gandalf. Here in The Lord of the Rings, Tolkien says, "Of course Gandalf must reappear later. Probably fall is not so deep as it seemed. Gandalf thrusts Balrog under him, and eventually following the subterranean stream in the gulf, he found a way out, but he does not turn up until they have had many adventures." I love how he just gets the Balrog to break his fall.
Right. And so probably the fall is not so deep as it seemed. So when you think of some of those beautiful cinematic scenes,
right,
of
where it seems like he's falling in slow motion because of the scale of that cavern.
Yeah.
But of course, it is a much deeper chasm than Tolkien was originally thinking here.
As we learn when Gandalf...
Yeah, we'll learn later when he comes back.
Yeah.
Right. Gimli says, "Deep is the abyss that is spanned by the bridge. None has measured it." Gandalf confirms there is a bottom, but he says it's, quote, "beyond light and knowledge." So it's a very, very long way.
Yeah, it's deep.
Yeah, it is definitely deep. Well, folks, do you think you know what's coming next?
Is it time? I think it's time.
I think it's time. Well, here we go. Folks, you knew this day was coming, right? It's the Balrog sidebar. Long awaited, never duplicated.
Duplicated.
Well done. There's your Aladdin reference for the day. All right, first let's talk about what Balrogs are. Now, most of you know they are Maiar who were in the service of Morgoth. That means that, well, initially they were either drawn to his splendor in the days of his greatness and remained in that allegiance down into his darkness, or they were corrupted afterwards to a service with lies and treacherous gifts. Now, those lines, which are from Valaquenta in the Silmarillion, apply to any of the Maiar who served Melkor. But the Balrogs are mentioned specifically. Dreadful among these spirits were the Valaraukar, the scourges of fire that in Middle-earth were called the Balrogs, demons of terror.
Now later, in Chapter 3 of the Quenta Silmarillion, of the coming of the elves and the captivity of Melkor, we learn that in Autumno, Melkor gathered his demons about him, those spirits who first adhered to him in the days of his splendor, and became most like him in his corruption. Their hearts were of fire, but they were cloaked in darkness, and terror went before them. They had whips of flame. Balrogs they were named in Middle-earth in later days. So it seems they didn't need to be corrupted afterwards like some of the Maiar. They were, in the words of the Valaquenta, the ones drawn to his splendor in the days of his greatness.
Right.
They're his original posse.
That's right. OG Balrog, man.
That's right, yeah. And that reference to Autumno explains the flame of Udun that we were talking about a moment ago.
It certainly does. Now, we also dug into the letters. They're only mentioned in 2 letters in Carpenter's volume. The first is a brief mention in the relatively infamous letter number 210 to Forrest Ackerman, in which Tolkien systematically dismantles just about everything in Zimmerman's proposed script. Nothing there about wings, unfortunately. Just a confirmation that the Balrog never speaks or makes any vocal sound at all. Above all, he does not laugh or sneer.
That's right. Zimmerman had him laughing or sneering, didn't he?
Right.
But I do love the fact that the Balrog doesn't make any sound. It makes him that much scarier.
Yeah, it makes him much more terrifying.
Yeah. Now, the other more significant mention in the letters is in letter number 144 to Naomi Mitchison, which is a really insightful letter for a lot of reasons. Unfortunately, it also fails to give us anything about wings or their lack of wings. But here's what Tolkien does say. The Balrog is a survivor from the Silmarillion and the legends of the First Age. The Balrogs, of whom the whips were the chief weapons, well,
there we go again,
were primeval spirits of destroying fire, chief servants of the primeval dark power of the First Age. They were supposed to have been all destroyed in the overthrow of Thangorodrim, his fortress in the north. But it is here found, there is usually a hangover, especially of evil, from one age to another, that one had escaped and taken refuge under the mountains of Hithaiglin, the Misty Mountains. It is observable that only the elf knows what the thing is, and doubtless Gandalf.
That's right. Now, in the Treason of Isengard, we discover that in the original version of this chapter, Tolkien described the Balrog as no more than man-high, yet terror seemed to go before it. They could see the furnace fire of its yellow eyes from afar. Its arms were very long. It had a red, and then in brackets, tongue, because Christopher couldn't tell from the notes. But then Tolkien noted in the margins, altered description of Balrog. It seemed to be of man's shape, but its form could not be plainly discerned. It felt larger than it looked. That's important, I think.
That's that fear we were talking about, isn't it?
Exactly. And it's, again, the reminder that it isn't massive. It doesn't look massively large. It felt larger than it looks.
Right.
Now, going back in history even further, Tolkien originally envisioned, and I remember we talked about this in the first season, large numbers of Balrogs taking part in the assault on Gondolin. But in Morgoth's Ring, Tolkien wrote in the margins of a passage about Melkor sending forth his Balrogs that there should not be supposed more than, say, 3 or at most 7 ever existed. Now, given that limited quantity and the fact that most were slain when Thangorodrim was overthrown, this may be the very last one.
That's right. Now let's take a look at some of the inspiration for Balrogs. Now, although we don't want to look too closely at the bones, I guess.
No.
Although that's less true every week, I think. Tom Shippey has something to say that we've actually touched on before. Back in episode 114, our special about race in Tolkien. It was originally our Patreon special in September 2018, but then we released it as episode 114 on the main feed in February 2019.
Right.
Anyway, back in that episode, we talked about an Old English word, Síl-Héroan, which had traditionally been used in Old English texts to mean Ethiopian, but that Tolkien believed etymologically meant something completely different. Here's what Shippey has to say about that in Author of the Century. In modern dictionaries and editions, these Síl-Wera, and he's using a later form of the noun, are invariably translated as Ethiopians. Tolkien thought that the name should have been written Síl-Héroa. Furthermore, he suggested that a Síl-Héroa was a kind of fire giant. The first element in the compound meant both sun and jewel. The second was related to Latin carbo, soot. When an Anglo-Saxon of the pre-literate Dark Age said Síl-Héroa, before any Englishman had ever heard of Ethiopia or of the Book of Exodus, Tolkien believed that what he meant was, and here he quotes Tolkien himself, rather the sons of Muspel, And that's a reference to fire creatures in Norse mythology who will bring on Ragnarok, the great battle between the Norse gods and the powers of evil.
Mm-hmm.
Rather the sons of Muspel than of Ham, that's the son of Noah, the ancestors of the Silherwan with red-hot eyes that emitted sparks, with faces black as soot.
Thanks for that, because that's deep stuff. That's a deep dive. Mm-hmm. That's a B-side cut into Shippey's author of the century.
Into an interesting inspiration, really. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. But now we know there's a question that you really want us to answer. You've been asking this. We've gotten millions of questions in the mailbag. That might be an exaggeration.
It's one of the great controversies of Tolkien fandom.
Yeah. Were the Balrogs left-handed?
We're going to answer it for you today here, folks.
That's right. Do they have wings? Let's be honest. The question everybody wants to know, what about Balrog wings? That's what everybody wants to know. So let's go ahead and dig into this finally and definitively, shall we?
Well, as definitively as we can.
There you go. Now, the most common argument for Balrogs having wings is this line from the text that we just read. Suddenly, it drew itself up to a great height, and its wings were spread from wall to wall. Sounds pretty clear. But to put this line in context, you have to look just a bit before when we read, his enemy halted again, facing him, and the shadow about it reached out like two vast wings. Mm-hmm. So what we have to decide is whether the wings that were spread from wall to wall refers to literal wings or to the wing-like shadows that were mentioned just a few lines previously.
Now, we believe the line, the shadow about it reached out like two vast wings, is a simile. I think that's clearly a simile, if you remember similes from school. Yeah. But we also believe that the second line is a metaphor that refers back to that simile. It's sort of an extension of that simile into a metaphor.
Right. And in fact, we had a really interesting Twitter exchange with our friend Dr. Luke Shelton of the Tolkien Experience podcast. He diagrammed the first sentence where it's described like two vast wings. Mm-hmm. And then a conversation took place in which a few of us talked about how the simile in the first sentence is extended by using it as a metaphor, which is still a comparison, but with no like in a later sentence.
Right. And Tolkien uses this construction, I guess you could call it, in a few other places. There's something similar in the chapter 3 is Company. When Tolkien is describing the elves' retreat in Woodhall, he says, "There the green floor ran on into the wood and formed a wide space like a hall, roofed by the boughs of trees. Their great trunks ran like pillars down each side." That emphasis is mine.
Right.
In the middle, there was a wood fire blazing, and upon the tree pillars, torches with lights of gold and silver were burning steadily. So there you've got first the simile, the great trunks ran like pillars, comparing those trunks to the pillars in a hall. And then later, he uses a metaphor of tree pillars that calls back that simile. It's not that the trees have suddenly become pillars.
No, they're still trees.
They're still trees. He's just using a metaphor the second time he mentions it.
To call back to that simile. Tolkien uses this technique again in Akallabeth when the Valar send storm clouds that look like eagles to smite the Númenóreans. And out of the west there would come at times a great cloud in the evening, shaped as it were an eagle, with pinions spread to the north and the south, and slowly it would loom up, blotting out the sunset, and then uttermost night would fall upon Númenor. And some of the eagles bore lightning beneath their wings, and thunder echoed between sea and cloud. Now, first the simile, comparing the clouds to being shaped like an eagle. Similes typically use like or as. In this case, it's as it were an eagle. But then in a later sentence, the metaphor of some of those eagles bearing lightning. But these eagles aren't eagles. They're still just clouds.
That's right. And I think especially in the Akallabeth passage, we see how he uses that similar construction to a similar dramatic effect to what he does here at the Balrog.
Yeah,
now,
absolutely.
In all three of these cases, the transition from a simile to a metaphor is used to really start to make you think that the thing being compared to is actually there, is actually a literal thing. And I'm afraid Tolkien accomplishes this too well, because I think a lot of people have landed on
pro wings,
have landed on pro wings, exactly. But it really is it is a dramatic effect that he's achieving with this. It would not be as powerful to use the simile the second time around. It's much more powerful to use the metaphor the second time around.
Now, of course, that interpretation of a metaphor calling back to the simile is going to be something that many folks disagree with.
Yeah.
But let's use an old debate technique, and we can look at both interpretations, and we can see that the conclusion actually depends on your underlying presumption to begin with. Let's start by replacing shadow with arms. Nobody disagrees that Balrogs have arms. It's pretty obvious. Now, if we had the shadow about it reached out like two vast arms, we'd still see this as a simile because it's like two vast arms. But then if the second line had its arms were spread from wall to wall, we would almost certainly read this as referring to actual arms, not the shadow arms. And that's how you view these passages if you believe that Balrogs have wings. But if you replace shadow with, I don't know, let's say tentacles, we'd have a different result.
Because we just can't get enough about tentacles around here lately.
No, we can't get enough about tentacles, but I have to also give a hat tip to the Encyclopedia of Arda for this example.
Okay.
Nobody thinks Balrogs have tentacles, so we'd clearly read the first line as a simile again, right? The shadow reached about it like two vast tentacles. But the second line about its tentacles were spread from wall to wall would clearly be seen as a metaphor referring back to the earlier simile. Nobody would make the argument that they suddenly sprang actual tentacles. That's how the two of us see
Like
this.
it's a displacer beast, and it's got it's got tentacles coming out of its shoulder. Yeah.
That's awesome. But in both cases, the arguments, I have to admit, in both cases are somewhat circular. Whatever you already assume about Balrog wings is going to turn out to be true based on your interpretation of those two lines.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. So let's start by looking at some of the pro-wing arguments, and let's see what we come up with. First, let's take a closer look at the literal interpretation of the second half of this earlier reading. The idea that its wings were spread from wall to wall must refer to literal wings and couldn't possibly be metaphorical. That if it was a metaphor, maybe Tolkien would have written, and its wings like shadow were spread, or something else
Well, that
like
would be a simile, but yeah.
That's true, yeah. Now, while there are a lot of examples of metaphors that we could use to shut this one down, let's go to something earlier in this chapter when it said that Gandalf came flying down the steps and fell to the ground.
I remember pointing this out at the
It
time.
doesn't say Gandalf appeared to come flying down, and arguably again, I think it would sort of break the dramatic effect of the passage if he did. But no one would seriously read that as suggesting Gandalf has the power to fly and chose this particular moment to suddenly demonstrate that ability.
Pretty odd moment to decide to show that one.
Like, he has wings.
Oh, wow.
It's like when R2-D2 suddenly has jets in like episode 2 or something.
And can climb over little obstacles on the ground. Right. When did that happen? Right. So can we mention one other metaphor, though? Because, well, I like this one because it also is about wings. In The Passing of the Grey Company, Aragorn recalls the words of Malbeth the Seer, who says, "Over the land there lies a long shadow, westward reaching wings of darkness." So, wings, darkness, shadow, just saying.
Yeah. So once again, literal darkness referred to as being like wings. Yeah.
Right, exactly.
Not literal wings.
No.
Now, the other big pro-wing argument is a line from Morgoth's Ring. It's an early variant of the passage describing how Balrogs came to save Melkor from his awful date with Ungoliant.
This is that emergency text to your friend. Dude, rescue me, man.
Guys, save me, please. Yeah, I need out of here. Swiftly they arose, and they passed with winged speed over Hithlum, and they came to Lamoth as a tempest of fire. Now, the argument is that the Balrogs arose, meaning went up into the air, and that they passed over the land.
Right.
And did so with winged speed, which people say, oh, well, clearly they're above the land they're flying. They must be winged.
Right.
But there are plenty of other examples of Tolkien using these phrases, or similar phrases, referring to entities that we can all agree are clearly land-bound. Later on, we'll see that the lady arose, and Celeborn led them back. Okay, Galadriel did not sprout wings and fly.
No, she didn't.
Or, at length they, this is referring to Aragorn and others, arose and took their leave of Eowyn. Or, and Aragorn arose and went out, and he sent for the sons of Elrond. There's nothing that suggests that the word arose requires actual flight or wings, and I think people would think it's ridiculous to say that it did.
Exactly. But then we have the passing over bit. Now, to counter this, I'm actually going to read more than I have to because, well, you'll understand. Then Fingolfin beheld, as it seemed to him, the utter ruin of the Noldor, and the defeat beyond redress of all their houses. And filled with wrath and despair, he mounted upon Rochalor, his great horse, and rode forth alone, and none might restrain him. He passed over Dor Newfauglith like a wind amid the dust. I'm going to read that again. He passed over Dor Newfauglith like a wind amid the dust. And all that beheld his onset fled in amaze, thinking that Orome himself was come, for a great madness of rage was upon him, so that his eyes shone like the eyes of the Valar. Now, okay, I read more than I have to because Fingolfin.
Yeah, we'll allow it.
Well, thank you. But you caught the important part, right? The part I read twice. He passed over Dor Newfauglith like a wind amid the dust, but he was on a horse, on the ground. I mean, clearly. So, again, passing over.
You mean Rochalor wasn't a Pegasus?
No, he wasn't. Wouldn't that have been nice?
Yeah.
We also have this passage from the Disaster of the Gladden Fields. Of their journey, nothing is told until they had passed over the Daggerlad and on northward. Or from the Return of the King, the road had bent a little northward, and the stretch that they had passed over was now screened from sight. So passed over does not mean they actually passed over on a different plane.
Right. Well, now let's get to that W word, winged speed, which is certainly a metaphor. A metaphor is, I think people probably know, the application of a name or descriptive term or phrase to an object or action to which it is imaginatively but not literally applicable.
There you go.
So unless speed itself can literally have wings, and I don't think anyone wants to make that argument.
Can I have that argument, please? I'd like to make that argument. No, I wouldn't.
Winged speed is a metaphor. I just want people to know, to understand that participle applies to speed, not to the creatures.
Right. That is correct. Now, we've also seen the phrase tempest of fire argued as definitive of the Balrogs' literal flight. Remember, they came to Lammoth as a tempest of fire. But a storm can still quite easily be metaphorical. It doesn't have to be a literal airborne storm. Aragorn says, when the Rohirrim are fleeing to Helm's Deep, would that it were daylight and we might ride down upon them like a storm from the mountain. So no, that proves nothing either.
Right. So here's the thing. At the end of the day, the pro-wings interpretation of the text in our chapter, it really only works if you already assume that the Balrogs have wings.
Right.
It's a purely circular argument, and there is no textual evidence to support the conclusion as anything more than speculative. That's just plainly there in the text.
That just is. There's nothing that we can, the pro-wings argument can say to provide anything beyond the fact that it's a circular argument with no textual evidence. But here's where we have to confess, there's nothing that really proves beyond all doubt that Balrogs have wings. We just believe the evidence is much stronger for this position, and here are a few reasons why. We already know that there are precisely 0 mentions of Balrogs taking flight in any of Tolkien's works, even when it would be pretty helpful to avoid, plummeting to your death. We don't need to go through the reams of evidence because you already know about them. Durin's Bane dies when Gandalf says he threw down my enemy and he fell from the high place and broke the mountainside where he smote it in his ruin. A phrase I absolutely love, by the way. When I die, I want to die smiting something in my ruin, really.
Yeah, throwing down your enemy.
That's the best way to go.
Yeah.
Or in the Silmarillion, when Glorfindel and the Balrog duel upon a pinnacle of rock in that high place, and both fell to ruin in the abyss. Or the times when it would have been helpful to have flying Balrogs, like trying to locate Gondolin. And remember that in the Silmarillion, we learned that Morgoth loosed upon his foes the last desperate assault that he had prepared, and out of the pits of Angband there issued the winged dragons that had not before been seen, for until that day no creatures of his cruel thought had yet assailed the air.
Yeah, it's pretty clear that the Balrogs are not an air power. Now, the counter-arguments to that are usually twofold. Either, one, they were prevented from using their wings, Durin's Bane's wings were so big he couldn't use them in the tight space on the bridge, or the one that fell with Glorfindel had damaged wings. Or two, that they have wings, but they're still flightless, like ostriches or penguins.
Okay.
Now, the first counter-argument about size defeats itself when you look at the earlier textual evidence about the size of the chamber of Mizarbul and the doorway, and how the Balrogs somehow managed to get into that tiny doorway, even with a wingspan approaching that of a small airliner.
Right. I mean, that goes into a lot of math and a lot about the size of the room and the fact that his wings spread from wall to wall.
Yeah.
And the fact, and then, how big a creature has to be to sustain wings of a certain size. We're not going to get that far into the weeds today. But it suffices to say that the argument defeats itself simply based on the size of the spaces the Balrog has already been.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Now, the second argument is interesting, this idea that they have wings, but they're still flightless. Honestly, though, it doesn't make a lot of sense because flightless birds still have wings because they are by nature birds. They are just birds that lost flight through the process of evolution. Now, if Balrogs
have not evolved.
They've not evolved. That's not the point here. They haven't devolved or evolved. Now, if Balrogs of the first age had flight, and the question was whether Durin's Bane still had wings but couldn't fly, we might be able to take seriously that parallel of a flightless bird. But Balrogs were never birds in the first place. And the truth is, vestigial appendages are vestigial only because they were once but no longer used.
Right. That's what vestigial
that doesn't fly.
Is. Yeah.
Quite literally, that doesn't fly.
Yeah. Nice.
I didn't even mean to do that, but it was brilliant.
It was. Now, there's one last argument that you sometimes hear. Well, Balrogs are Maiar. Therefore, they either have the ability to change their raiment at will. So maybe sometimes they have wings and sometimes they don't.
Sometimes you feel like some wings. Sometimes you don't because... Sorry, a little Almond Joy, little mounds there for you.
Yeah, exactly. Or B, that some Balrogs had wings and some didn't because they each chose their own raiment.
Now, look, I'm sorry. That second argument is totally irrelevant. I mean, as we discussed, Tolkien's later idea was that there shouldn't be more than a few Balrogs in the world ever. And the few Balrogs that we see have no wings. So there's not reason to believe that there's some Balrog out there who's never shown or described who might theoretically have wings or 4 arms or 2 heads or some spiky things going down his back. If there's one out there like that, it frankly has no bearing on whether the Balrogs we know from the text have them or not.
On whether this Balrog, Durin's Bane, or the Balrog on the mountain that fought Glorfindel, both of whom plummeted to their deaths, have them or not. Yeah. And as for the first argument, I don't believe that Balrogs would still be able to change their raiment based on what we know about the way Ainur and raiment works. Among the, let's call them the evil Ainur. We know that Morgoth and Sauron can no longer change their raiment because they've invested so much of their power into physical objects. But the Osanwe Kenta essay, which surprisingly has some interesting insights on this, says that the ability to change one's raiment can also be lost because of the great evils that, for example, Morgoth did in the visible body. And it even says, so it was also with even some of his greatest servants, as in these later days we see. They became wedded to the forms of their evil deeds.
Oh, wow. That's spot on.
Yeah, it is. Now, the narrator, Pengalov, in that particular essay, he seems to be referring to at least Sauron there. But the reference to some of his greatest servants suggests that this applies to others as well.
Strongly suggests, frankly. And it makes perfect sense with the way we've seen Tolkien deal with raiment shifting.
The more time you spend corrupting yourself, the more time you spend, and even the more time you spend just sort of doing worldly things. We see that with Melian and how she was trapped,
part of the world,
she was trapped in her raiment, and she was good.
The chains and trammels of Arda,
Yeah, that's the phrase I was thinking of. We see that this happens, being in the world for a longer time, and especially doing evil things in the world, traps you to the raiment that you're in. And so I just don't buy that the Balrogs, today Durin's Bane is going to pull out some wings to fight the wizard.
He wakes up in the morning, he checks his calendar. Oh, today's a wing day.
We got a wizard and 8 other guys coming through here. I think I'm going to do some wings here.
I better sprout my rings today.
I think the wings are really going to sell this look right now.
I know they're still flightless, right? But they'll be intimidating. They'll add to that intimidation.
Sure, yeah.
Never mind that I already have a fear
I got the wings,
and terror.
No.
Look, the fact of the matter is this comes down to Occam's razor in many ways. We have to develop incredibly complicated theories about the wings of a Balrog in order for them to exist in Tolkien's universe. Frankly, we have to come up with conspiracy theory level type complicated theories.
You got like the red thumbtacks in the wall and the string connecting them.
And the pictures and the... But the truth is, after reading the rest of the Legendarium and digging through it for bits about Balrogs, we find that the simplest, cleanest, I dare say easiest solution is to conclude that they do not have wings.
Absolutely.
At the end of the day, given how descriptive Tolkien was in terms of, everything, the fact that he didn't explicitly describe the Balrog as having wings, especially since the wings would have to be more than 100 feet wide to spread from wall to wall.
In this space,
it only makes sense to conclude that they didn't.
Absolutely.
The wings would be the largest, the most obvious characteristic. And to ignore them at every appearance of the Balrogs through the entire Legendarium, well, that would be inconsistent with everything we know about how Tolkien created his world.
Couldn't agree more. I hate to do it again because we're always agreeing. But
I know, that's true. Wouldn't it be nice if we were on different sides of this one?
Yeah, it would. I don't know if we would have lasted this long if we were on different sides of the Balrog wings.
No, that's true. Probably not.
Nope, I could not possibly agree more. I think that wraps it up as far as I'm concerned. Hopefully we've convinced some folks out there. If not, I know that, we've already discussed the fact that there's no 100% clear proof beyond a shadow of a doubt either way. But I think, as you've said, Alan, I think,
and I suppose there's no 100% beyond the shadow of the doubt evidence that we landed on the moon and that the Earth is actually spherical in nature. No 100% beyond the shadow of a doubt. And because of that, the argument that the Earth is flat still exists. Just like the argument that Balrogs
just like
have
the
wings
argument that we never
exists.
landed on the moon still exists. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it is true. You really do have to jump through some hoops.
Yeah.
To land on Balrogs having wings. I'm sorry,
you really
but that's just what it is.
It stretches logic beyond really what it can take.
Yeah, it does. So, okay, enough about wings. I think we really are finally done with that, and
I think we are.
I'm sure we'll come back to it someday. But I think we've done all the work we can on it.
We've put those wings in a basket and doused them with buffalo sauce. We are done.
Tasty wings. But now, on to other more pressing questions, because I can hear people saying, all right, guys, enough about the wings. What about the real question? Is Durin's Bane in league with Sauron?
That is a good question.
Arguably a more interesting question.
And a more important question. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. More important question for sure. And remember, we talked about this a few episodes ago with the Watcher in the Water. At the time, we concluded that the Watcher was apparently in league with the denizens of Moria, up to and including the Balrog, who seems to be the apex monster in the mountain.
Yeah, he's the boss. Nothing happens without him, I'm sure.
Right. But does that mean that they're all in league with Sauron? Now, I'm going to admit, I used to think that he wasn't. I used to think that the Balrog was just doing his own thing under here. And as support for that, I cited letter number 175, in which Tolkien said, "Cannot people imagine things hostile to men and hobbits who prey on them without being in league with the devil?"
That's right.
Now,
I remember that.
That letter was specifically in response to the idea that Old Man Willow was an ally of Sauron, which Tolkien was completely shattering with that letter.
Absolutely. Now, many of our listeners have asked the same question. Our old friend Tanya in New York reminded us that most of the really evil things, which Old Man Willow arguably is not, he's just a really angry tree, kind of like that hard cider ad, right? Angry Orchard.
Angry Orchard.
The old forest, yeah. So, most of the really evil things were being drawn to Sauron in the Third Age. And we get this from Otrapada. But ever the shadow in Mirkwood grew deeper. I should probably say for those who just joined us, Otrapada is of the Rings of Power in the Third Age. It's the final epilogue in the Silmarillion. So
there you go.
We've gotten a few gripes about here and there where we haven't spelled out our acronyms because we've used them for so long. So from that we get, but ever the shadow in Mirkwood grew deeper, and to Dol Guldur evil things repaired out of all the dark places of the world, and they were united again under one will, and their malice was directed against the elves and the survivors of Numenor. Dark places of the world sure does sound like a reference to Moria and Durin's Bane.
It really does. Now, some people, including yours truly in the past, have said that Sauron couldn't possibly control Balrogs. I mean, they're all Maiar, and as we've seen, the Balrogs are the OG fallen Maiar.
Right, they fell even before Sauron did.
Before Sauron did. So I'm like, they're not going to take orders from Myron, that guy who used to run with Aule's crew, who used to sing about jewelry in the music.
Oh, man, that's great.
Right? I mean, Myron, I'm not following you. Sorry.
Yeah,
but I'm Sauron now. No. I'm King Excellent. No.
That's
sorry,
right. I'm King Excellent.
That's where I used to land on it. But maybe I was wrong about that. First of all, not all the Ainur, including not all the Maiar, were created equal.
That's true.
And of the Maiar who followed Melkor, we are told in Valaquenta that the greatest was that spirit whom the Eldar called Sauron, or Gorthaur the Cruel. So maybe Sauron is powerful enough to command the allegiance of the Balrogs.
Maybe. In fact, Otrapada says that Sauron commanded all the things that used to follow Morgoth after Morgoth's defeat. Here's the text. Now Sauron's lust and pride increased until he knew no bounds, and he determined to make himself master of all things in Middle-earth. He brooked no freedom nor any rivalry, and he gathered again under his government all the evil things of the days of Morgoth that remained on earth or beneath it, and the orcs were at his command and multiplied like flies.
Can we please stop talking about orcs multiplying?
Seriously, multiplied earlier, it was spawning, and now it's multiplied like flies.
Coming up way too often on this podcast lately.
Way too much.
It is not that kind of podcast, folks.
No, it's not. No. Just you.
You. But I think perhaps the most persuasive evidence comes from the appendices to Lord of the Rings itself.
Yeah.
Appendix A says this about the coming of Durin's Bane. The dwarves delved deep at that time, seeking beneath Barazinbar for mithril, the metal beyond price that was becoming yearly ever harder to win. Thus they roused from sleep a thing of terror that, flying from Thangorodrim, had lain hidden at the foundations of the earth since the coming of the host to the west, a Balrog of Morgoth. Now, next to roused from sleep, there's a footnote, or released from prison. It may well be that it had already been awakened by the malice of Sauron.
And finally, Appendix B tells us that in Third Age 2480, Sauron begins to people Moria with his creatures. Now, that's not definitive, but it raises the question of why Sauron would send his creatures to Moria if there was a rival fallen Maya there that he didn't control.
Right. So there is lots of evidence there to suggest that Sauron was aware of and relying on the Balrog to do what Sauron wanted it to do.
Yeah, I have to concede on that. That's probably where we're at. I don't think it's a direct command like, with the Witch King, for instance, where he's a right-hand man.
Yeah.
I don't think there's that level of control.
I think that might be it. I think he probably is commanding Durin's Bane. I don't think he can control him.
Right.
I think this is more like, if you think about the role the Hulk plays in the Avengers.
Oh, yeah.
Like in the early movies. I'm
Right.
a movie guy, not a comic guy. I don't know the comics, but like thinking of the early movies where they send him out there, but they can't control him. Right. Or Mongo from Blazing Saddles, like you send him in. He's like
that's a great
he's
one.
The big guy you send in to cause some trouble, but you can't really control him. He's kind of
I would lean more towards that. I think Sauron knows that this is a dangerous ally, and he's more of an ally than a subordinate, I think might be a better way to put it. That it's not so much that he's truly subordinate to Sauron, even though we know that Sauron commands all these things. I think the Balrog at least would see himself more like a peer. And there is a risk.
And maybe sees Sauron as having more power, and so I'm going to work with Sauron for now.
Right. But if I do get the ring, maybe I won't.
Yeah.
If there's that much thought going on.
And I think that's a really good point to raise. If the Balrog had somehow gotten his hands on the ring, he would not have gone back to Barad-dûr and given it to Sauron.
No, he's not like the Witch King of Angmar who would have returned it. No, absolutely not. So then the question then is, are all of them, including the Watcher, then directly or indirectly working for Sauron?
I think potentially indirectly, yeah.
Indirectly, I don't know that the Watcher has any direct connection to Sauron other than perhaps he was.
I think the Watcher is probably more working with the Balrog.
Right.
Maybe not working for the Balrog, but we saw how the Watcher trapped them in Moria.
Yeah. Well, and then there's the idea that the Watcher, this is actually a point that a listener raised and made a really great logical connection here that I hadn't thought about. The Watcher in the water, that area had to be dammed first for the lake to exist before the Watcher was there. Somebody dammed that lake before the Watcher arrived, because unless the Watcher's amphibious, dams it up while he's in the air and then waits for the water to show up. I doubt that. I mean, he's a cephalopod type creature, so he's definitely a water creature. But that means somebody did that first in order for the Watcher to have a safe, watery place to be.
Yeah.
So that means there's some cooperation for sure.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting.
We'll never establish a clear chain of command here. And I doubt that there is one. I don't think that.
No,
I don't think that the big bads of Middle Earth work that way.
No,
I think
they absolutely don't.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. Watcher's going to do what Watcher's going to do. Balrog's going to do what Balrog's going to do. That's what they do.
Absolutely. But that does beg the question then. So when the Watcher went after Frodo, was he going for the ring?
Drawn by the lure of the ring, perhaps, but
not going for it. Not going for it with the intent to give it back to Sauron, or even
let me check my wanted sheet.
Right.
Small hobbit wearing green, chain around his neck. That's the one right there. I'm going to grab him. No.
That's clearly not happening. Yeah, I think you're right. I think it is drawn by the ring, drawn by the evil of the ring, the way we saw a lot of evil things were drawn by it.
Right. Evil's just drawn to it no matter what.
Yeah,
exactly.
So not working for Sauron, but certainly all aware of each other.
Pointing in the same direction, right?
Yeah,
going in the same, in the same ballpark, working for the same purposes.
Yeah.
All right.
Awesome stuff.
Well, that might be the longest sidebar we've ever spent.
I think so. I think it is.
And now we're going to finish up the chapter. I hope they are too.
We still have more reading to do, don't we?
We do. We have some more reading, so I'm going to have you finish up the chapter for us, and we'll discuss that before wrap it up.
Okay. The fires went out, and blank darkness fell. The company stood rooted with horror, staring into the pit. Even as Aragorn and Boromir came flying back, the rest of the bridge cracked and fell. With a cry, Aragorn roused them.
"Come, I will lead you now," he called. "We must obey his last command. Follow me."
They stumbled wildly up the great stairs beyond the door, Aragorn leading, Boromir at the rear. At the top was a wide, echoing passage. Along this they fled. Frodo heard Sam at his side weeping, and then he found that he himself was weeping as he ran. Doom, doom, doom. The drum beats rolled behind, mournful now and slow. Doom. They ran on. The light grew before them. Great shafts pierced the roof. They ran swifter. They passed into a hall, bright with daylight from its high windows in the east. They fled across it. Through its huge broken doors they passed, and suddenly before them the great gates opened, an arch of blazing light. There was a guard of orcs crouching in the shadows behind the great doorposts, towering on either side, but the gates were shattered and cast down. Aragorn smote to the ground the captain that stood in his path, and the rest fled in terror of his wrath. The company swept past them and took no heed of them. Out of the gates they ran and sprang down the huge and age-worn steps, the threshold of Moria. Thus at last they came beyond hope under the sky, and felt the wind on their faces. They did not halt until they were out of bowshot from the walls. Dimrill Dale lay about them. The shadow of the misty mountains lay upon it, but eastwards there was a golden light on the land. It was but 1 hour after noon. The sun was shining. The clouds were white and high. They looked back. Dark yawned the archway of the gates under the mountain shadow. Faint and far beneath the earth rolled the slow drum beats. Doom. A thin black smoke trailed out. Nothing else was to be seen. The dale all around was empty. Doom. Grief at last wholly overcame them, and they wept long, some standing and silent, some cast upon the ground. Doom. Doom. The drum beats faded.
Oh, man. Oh, what an overwhelmingly emotional moment that is.
Yeah. Thank you for the chance to read that passage. That's such a powerful passage.
It really is. I mean, I knew I had to decide. I'm like, all right, I could either get this really cool, dramatic passage, or I could get the face off, and I had to take the face off.
Of course.
But it meant giving you this, not to mention the arrival of the Balrog. But
yeah.
So let's go ahead and talk about this really amazing passage, this sort of denouement, if you will, of this scene, right? I mean, this is, as this crisis, as this climax has drawn to its end, now we have this after effect. You know, what's going on now?
This is the moment of sinking in of what's just happened.
Yeah, exactly. They got to absorb this thing, this unbelievable and literally unbelievable thing. They not only did they ever not expect to see a Balrog, those who even know what that was,
right?
But they certainly never
don't expect to see Gandalf fall.
No, he's
How
the
do you lose
one person
Gandalf?
in their company that you can never lose.
Right.
You know, he's not only the most indispensable, he's the most indefeatable, if you want to put it that way. Yeah.
Right. To the hobbits especially, this has to be
just
inconceivable to them.
Inconceivable in the truest sense of the word. I mean, we've abused that word so many times. But
thanks to Vizzini, yeah.
I know.
But no, it is literally inconceivable to the hobbits.
They could never have even thought that this would happen. Yeah, absolutely. So darkness falls. The fires are extinguished. Now, the rest of the bridge falls as Aragorn and Boromir come back, and Aragorn rightly assumes the lead, and immediately his first thing is, let's follow the last advice of Gandalf.
No time to stop and mourn now. We got to get out of here.
We got to do it. We got to get out now. Boromir wisely bringing up the rear. That's his job. He's going to protect. He's the second kind of in command, so to speak, right now, if you want to put it that way. I think that's who Aragorn would want to put in that position. Yeah. Just what a moment as they run.
Yeah, and we find ourselves very poignantly in the point of view of Frodo again.
Yes.
As Frodo first hears Sam weeping and then suddenly realizes he's weeping too.
Oh, I know.
Wow.
My heart just, I
know. And the drums even seem mournful.
Yeah, that was interesting.
I wonder about this. I don't know that the drums are literally mournful. Are they? I don't know if the drums are literally.
Is that how Frodo's hearing it, or are they literally like a mournful...
I think it's Frodo's perception of mournfulness. Knowing how the orcs are afraid of the Balrog, I don't think
they're not mourning the fall of the Balrog.
Like, oh, DB, he went down. I don't think it's that.
Man.
Yeah. I think this is Frodo's perception.
I think you're
right. Sure.
I agree. So we start getting some more light as they get into the first hall. It must be pretty eye-piercingly bright considering
it's
how long
it's
they've
one
been.
of those when you suddenly see bright light after being
and
in
your
darkness
eyes
for a long
just
time.
squint because you've been in darkness for days. They get to the Great Gates, and there's a last group of orcs. But I love this. This is just a momentarily thing. Just Aragorn, like, leader,
Nope,
gone.
dead. Yeah. One shot, one kill. I love it.
Exactly. Kills the captain, and the rest, as orcs often do, flee.
Yes, they do.
Or fly, as the case may be. Sans wings, just to
Right.
say. Because we haven't beat that horse enough.
No, that horse is not dead at all yet.
No.
And the Fellowship escapes.
It's barely horse-shaped anymore. Its carcass is just...
It's just a pulp at this point. We've beaten it so badly.
We have.
But the Fellowship escapes. They escape Moria beyond hope.
Yeah.
And they don't stop moving until they're well into the Dimril Dale.
Yeah,
And
sort of
when we
catastrophic there, really. Beyond hope. This is something they never thought
for sure.
they would be able to accomplish.
Absolutely, yeah. The light after darkness that comes beyond hope.
Yeah.
Pretty poignant.
It
And
really
we
is.
see that it's 1 o'clock in the afternoon.
Mhm.
And we see this golden light, high white clouds. I mean, it really is you think about Verlin Flieger and the way she loves to talk about the antitheses of light and dark. This is that moment here.
This is.
They've escaped from the darkest place against the darkest foe, and the darkest thing, Gandalf's death, has happened to them. And they get outside, and suddenly, oh, there is still light in the world,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's a beautiful moment.
It really is.
They look back at the gates, and they still see this thin smoke trailing out, and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing else to see.
And the drum beats fade, and then that's when the emotion hits them. The grief just
Mm-hmm.
overcomes them completely, wholly overcomes them.
Yeah.
And they weep.
As these few last dooms come out from below the ground.
That is such a poignant moment. And you just feel, especially for the hobbits, I think, at this point, but also for Aragorn, I think that's where I go to. And here's this guy who knows Gandalf better than any of the others, and who now has to lead the group.
Yeah.
And so he can't really be seen to be mourning as much as these others. He has to maintain control.
Right.
Oh, man, what a hard spot to be put in. But he's going to be, weeping and feeling grief just like the rest of them because, he
Gandalf's his friend.
He's
known Gandalf for a long time.
Right.
He and Gandalf have hunted together. They've known each other for a long time.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Boy, this is a heavy, heavy moment for the company, the 8 remaining in the company.
Mm-hmm.
Well, folks, the dale all around may be empty, but the common room certainly isn't. We've got Bartleman's Bag coming your way in just a minute, granted an abbreviated version. But when that's done, the talk continues all night long at the Prancing Pony.
That's right. We've always got lots of discussion happening in our social media spaces. At our common room on Facebook, you'll find comments, questions, corrections, and more on every episode, as well as updates from us throughout the week. Just look for the Prancing Pony Podcast on Facebook and click the like and follow buttons.
And now we have another common room over on Reddit. You can find some great discussions there at r/PrancingPonyPod. And as always, you can find us on Twitter and Instagram with the handle @PrancingPonyPod. So follow us wherever you might be. And if you like us, share us on Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, anywhere you can find Tolkien fans.
And if you really want to let the world know your feelings about us, give us a review on Apple Podcasts. The more reviews we have, the more visible our podcast is, and that helps others find us and this great community of Tolkien fans we've built together.
And finally, if you'd like access to exclusive content like postscripts, quarterly specials, PPP swag, and more, then check out patreon.com/prancingponypod to find out how you can join the fellowship of the podcast. Now, I think it's time to see what old Bartleman has in the mailbag for us. Sean?
All right. Well, I know we're already running long, so we're just going to get to one quick one here today.
Mm-hmm.
This is a follow-up on our conversation from episode 157 about the ill will of Caradhras and the idea that was a Melkor ingredient left over from Melkor's raising of the Misty Mountains.
Mm-hmm.
Kevin H. in New York actually wrote to us after we recorded that episode, but before we released it, so he hasn't had a chance to hear that yet. He actually came to us with this after listening to episode 154, and we just didn't get it in time to include it in 157.
Right.
He said, I was struck by the potency of a certain passage. When the narrator hinted of an outside agency controlling the weather, he continued by describing how the wind had died, the water has disappeared, and all signs of life were absent, red barren rock, and so on. According to Kevin, he sees this as the absence of Manwë, wind, Ulmo, water, and Aule and Yavanna, earth and wildlife. Kevin says this passage speaks to the growing potency of Melkor's agent here in Middle-earth. He means Sauron, but going on from our discussion in 157, I'd say potentially also just this remnant of Melkor himself in the mountain.
Sure. Yeah.
Kevin says, it is subtle, but do you think this is intentional?
Wow, the image is striking. Let's go back and read the passage itself. The morning was passing towards noon, and still the company wandered and scrambled in a barren country of red stones. Nowhere could they see any gleam of water or hear any sound of it. All was bleak and dry. Their hearts sank. They saw no living thing, and not a bird was in the sky, but what the night would bring if it caught them in that lost land, none of them cared to think.
Yeah. Now, it's hard to know whether Tolkien intended it or not. I have to admit, I'd lean towards saying he probably didn't intend it, but that doesn't mean I can't prove that, but
no.
Even if he did intend it or didn't intend it, that doesn't mean it's invalid for us as readers to find some symbolism in it, knowing what we know about the larger Middle-earth legendarium. I mean, I think this is one of those situations where even if Tolkien didn't intend it, what we know of the legendarium from reading the Silmarillion and other works, especially when we're thinking about these sort of elemental alignments of some of the Valar, I think that definitely changes the perception we have about this scene as readers. And I think that's a really interesting, and I think it's a really awesome catch by Kevin, whether Tolkien intended it or not.
Yeah, I mean, that's the tough part. I don't think, like with you, I don't think this is an intentional callback to those elemental natures, mostly because of the presence of Aule. Aule is, rock and earth, and there is still barren rock. It's not a healthy earth. Yavanna's not there, but Aule and rock. I mean, this is all Aule. Right
this is Aule's territory. That's true.
Yeah, and it kind of reminded me. The description of the landscape kind of reminded me of what we saw with the desolation of Smaug. And I don't think we're dealing there with an absence of, what the Valar and the powers, so much as we are dealing with a localized phenomenon.
Yeah.
That's related to, a creature or a set of creatures in this case.
A corruptive force, a corruptive creature.
Right. Now, does that make this any less interesting? No, not at all. I think it is a fascinating observation.
Yep.
That wind and water and life are gone here. I really do.
Definitely.
Thanks for that great insight, Kevin. We really appreciate that and a chance to talk about it briefly. Well, folks, after a very long time, that wraps it up for another episode of the Prancing Pony Podcast. Please be sure to join us again next week for our 5th annual Tolkien Reading Day special.
Wow, I can't believe this is going to be our 5th one of those, man.
No, I know.
It's really, really cool. It's so fun to do every year. And this year's theme is nature and industry. So you can bet we have some great stuff to read on that.
Oh, don't be hasty now. But we'll try. As always, folks, we want to thank each of you for listening, and we also want to give a very special thank you to our patrons at the Kierdance contribution tier. It's DeMay in Alaska, James in Virginia, Tamsin in Minnesota, Emily in Texas, Chad in Texas, Lance in New Jersey, Paul in Colorado, Jerry in Texas, Bruce in California, Mario in Utah, Seth in Texas, Ella in California, and Joseph in Texas. Thank you all so very much.
Make sure you don't miss a single episode of the Prancing Pony Podcast. Subscribe to the show through Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app.
And one last thing as always, don't forget to send your questions, comments, and most of all, your unconditional surrender regarding the matter of Balrog wings to Barlaman at theprancingponypodcast.com.
Barlaman is never punctual with the mail, and with each passing week, he gets less and less punctual. I think he's really tired of us always talking about how not punctual he is.
But he's going to show us, yeah.
He is. But we will get back to you as soon as he lets us. And your comment or question may be featured on an upcoming show.
Well, this has been far too short a time to spend among such excellent and admirable listeners. But until next time.
Farewell, friends.